Book 2, Chapter 1 of Resurrection. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 1. Property in Land. It was possible for Maslova's case to come before the Senate in a fortnight, at which time Nekhlyudov meant to go to Petersburg, and, if need be, to appeal to the Emperor, as the advocate who had drawn up the petition advised, should the appeal be disregarded, and according to the advocate, it was best to be prepared for that, since the causes for appeal were so slight. The party of convicts, among whom was Maslova, would very likely leave in the beginning of June. In order to be able to follow her to Siberia, as Nekhlyudov was firmly resolved to do, he was now obliged to visit his estates and settle matters there. Nekhlyudov first went to the nearest, Kuzminsky, a large estate that lay in the Black Earth district, and from which he derived the greatest part of his income. He had lived on that estate in his childhood and youth, and had been there twice since, and once, at his mother's request, he had taken a German steward there, and had with him verified the accounts. The state of things there, and the peasants' relations to the management, i.e. the landlord, had therefore been long known to him. The relations of the peasants to the administration were those of utter dependence on that management. Nekhlyudov knew all this when still a university student. He had confessed and preached Henry Georgism, and on the basis of that teaching had given the land inherited from his father to the peasants. It was true that, after entering the army, when he got into the habit of spending 20,000 roubles a year, those former occupations ceased to be regarded as a duty, and were forgotten, and he not only left off asking himself where the money his mother allowed him came from, but even avoided thinking about it. But his mother's death, the coming into the property, and the necessity of managing it, again raised the question as to what his position in reference to private property in land was. A month before, Nekhlyudov would have answered that he had not the strength to alter the existing order of things, that it was not he who was administering the estate, and would one way or another have eased his conscience, continuing to live far from his estates, and having the money sent him. But now he decided that he could not leave things to go on as they were, but would have to alter them in a way unprofitable to himself, even though he had all these complicated and difficult relations with the prison world which made money necessary, as well as a probable journey to Siberia before him. Therefore he decided not to farm the land, but to let it to the peasants at a low rent, to enable them to cultivate it without depending on a landlord. More than once, when comparing the position of a landowner with that of an owner of serfs, Nekhlyudov had compared the renting of land to the peasants, instead of cultivating it with hired labour, to the old system by which serf proprietors used to exact a money payment from their serfs in place of labour. It was not a solution of the problem, and yet a step towards a solution. It was a movement towards a less rude form of slavery, and it was in this way he meant to act. Nekhlyudov reached Kuzminsky about noon. Trying to simplify his life in every way, he did not telegraph, but hired a cart and pair at the station. The driver was a young fellow in a nankeen coat, with a belt below his long waist. He was glad to talk to the gentleman, especially because, while they were talking, his broken-winded white horse and the emaciated spavined one could go at a foot-pace, which they always liked to do. The driver spoke about the steward at Kuzminsky, without knowing that he was driving the master. Nekhlyudov had purposely not told him who he was. "That ostentatious German," said the driver, who had been to town and read novels, as he sat sideways on the box, passing his hand from the top to the bottom of his long whip, and trying to show off his accomplishments. "That ostentatious German has procured 3 light bays, and when he drives out with his lady, oh my! At Christmas he had a Christmas tree in the big house. I drove some of the visitors there. It had electric lights. You could not see the like of it in the whole of the government. What's it to him? He has cribbed a heap of money. I heard say he has bought an estate." Nekhlyudov had imagined that he was quite indifferent to the way the steward managed his estate, and what advantages the steward derived from it. The words of the long-waisted driver, however, were not pleasant to hear. A dark cloud now and then covered the sun. The larks were soaring above the fields of winter corn. The forests were already covered with fresh young green. The meadows speckled with grazing cattle and horses. The fields were being ploughed, and Nekhlyudov enjoyed the lovely day. But every now and then he had an unpleasant feeling, and, when he asked himself what it was caused by, he remembered what the driver had told him about the way the German was managing Kuzminsky. When he got to his estate and set to work, this unpleasant feeling vanished. Looking over the books in the office, and a talk with the foreman, who naively pointed out the advantages to be derived from the fact that the peasants had very little land of their own, and that it lay in the midst of the landlord's fields, made Nekhlyudov more than ever determined to leave off farming and to let his land to the peasants. From the office books and his talk with the foreman, Nekhlyudov found that 2/3 of the best of the cultivated land was still being tilled with improved machinery by labourers receiving fixed wages, while the other third was tilled by the peasants at the rate of 5 roubles per desiatan, about 2 3/4 acres, so that the peasants had to plough each desiatan 3 times, harrow it 3 times, sow and mow the corn, make it into sheaves, and deliver it on the threshing ground for 5 roubles, while the same amount of work done by wage labour came to at least 10 roubles. Everything the peasants got from the office they paid for in labour at a very high price. They paid in labour for the use of the meadows, for wood, for potato stalks, and were nearly all of them in debt to the office. Thus, for the land that lay beyond the cultivated fields, which the peasants hired, 4 times the price that its value would bring in if invested at 5% was taken from the peasants. Nekhlyudov had known all this before, but he now saw it in a new light, and wondered how he and the others in his position could help seeing how abnormal such conditions are. The steward's arguments that if the land were let to the peasants, the agricultural implements would fetch next to nothing, as it would be impossible to get even a quarter of their value for them, and that the peasants would spoil the land, and how great a loser Nekhlyudov would be, only strengthened Nekhlyudov in the opinion that he was doing a good action in letting the land to the peasants, and thus depriving himself of a large part of his income. He decided to settle this business now, at once, while he was there. The reaping and selling of the corn he left for the steward to manage in due season, and also the selling of the agricultural implements and useless buildings. But he asked his steward to call the peasants of the 3 neighbouring villages that lay in the midst of his estate, Kuzminsky, to a meeting, at which he would tell them of his intentions and arrange about the price at which they were to rent the land. With a pleasant sense of the firmness he had shown in the face of the steward's arguments, and his readiness to make a sacrifice, Nekhlyudov left the office, thinking over the business before him, and strolled round the house, through the neglected flower garden. This year the flowers were planted in front of the steward's house, over the tennis ground, now overgrown with dandelions, and along the lime tree walk, where he used to smoke his cigar, and where he had flirted with the pretty Kerimova, his mother's visitor. Having briefly prepared in his mind the speech he was going to make to the peasants, he again went in to the steward, and after tea, Having once more arranged his thoughts, he went into the room prepared for him in the big house, which used to be a spare bedroom. In this clean little room, with pictures of Venice on the walls, and a mirror between the two windows, there stood a clean bed with a spring mattress, and by the side of it a small table, with a decanter of water, matches, and an extinguisher. On the table, by the looking-glass, lay his open portmanteau, with his dressing-case and some books in it, a Russian book, The Investigation of the Laws of Criminality, and a German and an English book on the same subject, which he meant to read while travelling in the country. But it was too late to begin to-day, and he began preparing to go to bed. An old-fashioned, inlaid mahogany armchair stood in the corner of the room, and this chair, which Nekhlyudov remembered standing in his mother's bedroom, suddenly raised a perfectly unexpected sensation in his soul. He was suddenly filled with regret at the thought of the house that would tumble to ruin, and the garden that would run wild, and the forest that would be cut down, and all these farmyards, stables, sheds, machines, horses, cows, which he knew had cost so much effort, though not to himself, to acquire and to keep. It had seemed easy to give up all this, but now it was hard, not only to give this, but even to let the land and lose half his income. And at once, a consideration which proved that it was unreasonable to let the land to the peasants, and thus to destroy his property, came to his service. I must not hold property in land. If I possess no property in land, I cannot keep up the house and farm, and besides I am going to Siberia, and shall not need either the house or the estate, said one voice. All this is so, said another voice, but you are not going to spend all your life in Siberia. You may marry and have children, and must hand the estate on to them in as good a condition as you received it. There is a duty to the land too. To give up, to destroy everything is very easy, to acquire it very difficult. Above all, you must consider your future life, and what you will do with yourself, and you must dispose of your property accordingly. And are you really firm in your resolve? And then, are you really acting according to your conscience, or are you acting in order to be admired of men? Nekhlyudov asked himself all this, and had to acknowledge that he was influenced by the thought of what people would say about him. And the more he thought about it, the more questions arose, and the more unsolvable they seemed. In hopes of ridding himself of these thoughts by falling asleep, and solving them in the morning when his head would be fresh, he lay down on his clean bed. But it was long before he could sleep. Together with the fresh air and the moonlight, the croaking of the frogs entered the room, mingling with the trills of a couple of nightingales in the park, and one close to the window, in a bush of lilacs in bloom. Listening to the nightingales and the frogs, Nekhlyudov remembered the inspector's daughter, and her music, and the inspector. That reminded him of Maslova, and how her lips trembled, like the croaking of the frogs, when she said, "You must just leave it." Then the German steward began going down to the frogs, and had to be held back, but he not only went down, but turned into Maslova, who began reproaching Nekhlyudov, saying, "You are a prince, and I am a convict." No, I must not give in, thought Nekhlyudov, waking up, and again asking himself, "Is what I am doing right? I do not know, and no matter, no matter, I must only fall asleep now." And he began himself to descend, where he had seen the inspector and Maslova climbing down to, and there it all ended. End of Book 2, Chapter 1. Massachusetts. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 2. Efforts at Land Restoration. The next day Nekhlyudov awoke at 9 o'clock. The young office clerk who attended on the master brought him his boots, shining as they had never shone before, and some cold, beautifully clear spring water, and informed him that the peasants were already assembling. Nekhlyudov jumped out of bed and collected his thoughts. Not a trace of yesterday's regret at giving up and thus destroying his property remained now. He remembered this feeling of regret with surprise. He was now looking forward with joy to the task before him, and could not help being proud of it. He could see from the window the old tennis ground, overgrown with dandelions, on which the peasants were beginning to assemble. The frogs had not croaked in vain the night before. The day was dull. There was no wind. A soft, warm rain had begun falling in the morning, and hung in drops on leaves, twigs, and grass. Besides the smell of the fresh vegetation, the smell of damp earth, asking for more rain, entered in at the window. While dressing, Nekhlyudov several times looked out at the peasants gathered on the tennis ground. One by one they came, took off their hats or caps to one another, and took their places in a circle, leaning on their sticks. The steward, a stout, muscular, strong young man, dressed in a short pea-jacket, with a green stand-up collar and enormous buttons, came to say that all had assembled, but that they might wait until Nekhlyudov had finished his breakfast. Tea and coffee, whichever he pleased, both were ready. "No, I think I had better go and see them at once," said Nekhlyudov, with an unexpected feeling of shyness and shame at the thought of the conversation he was going to have with the peasants. He was going to fulfil a wish of the peasants, the fulfilment of which they did not even dare to hope for, to let the land to them at a low price, i.e. to confer a great boon, and yet he felt ashamed of something. When Nekhlyudov came up to the peasants, and the fair, the curly, the bald, the grey heads were bared before him, he felt so confused that he could say nothing. The rain continued to come down in small drops that remained on the hair, the beards, and the fluff of the men's rough coats. The peasants looked at the master, waiting for him to speak, and he was so abashed that he could not speak. This confused silence was broken by the sedate, self-assured German steward, who considered himself a good judge of the Russian peasant, and who spoke Russian remarkably well. This strong, overfed man, and Nekhlyudov himself, presented a striking contrast to the peasants with their thin, wrinkled faces and their shoulder blades protruding beneath their coarse coats. "Here's the prince wanting to do you a favour, and to let the land to you, only you are not worthy of it," said the steward. "How are we not worthy of it, Vasily Karlovitch? Don't we work for you? We were well satisfied with the deceased lady, God have mercy on her soul, and the young prince will not desert us now." "Our thanks to him," said a red-haired, talkative peasant. "Yes, that's why I've called you together. I should like to let you have all the land, if you wish it." The peasants said nothing, as if they did not understand or did not believe it. "Let's see, let us have the land. What do you mean?" asked a middle-aged man. "To let it to you, that you might have the use of it, at a low rent." "A very agreeable thing," said an old man. "If only the pay is such as we can afford," said another. "There's no reason why we should not rent the land. We are accustomed to live by tilling the ground. And it's quieter for you too that way. You'll have to do nothing but receive the rent. Only think of all the sin and worry now," several voices were heard saying. "The sin is all on your side," the German remarked. "If only you did your work and were orderly." "That's impossible for the likes of us," said a sharp-nosed old man. "You say, why do you let the horse get into the corn? Just as if I let it in. Why, I was swinging my scythe, or something of the sort, the livelong day, till the day seemed as long as a year, and so I fell asleep while watching the herd of horses at night, and it got into your oats, and now you're skinning me. And you should keep order." "It's easy for you to talk about order, but it's more than our strength will bear," answered a tall, dark, hairy, middle-aged man. "Didn't I tell you to put up a fence?" "You give us the wood to make it of," said a short, plain-looking peasant. "I was going to put up a fence last year, and you put me to feed vermin in prison for 3 months. That was the end of that fence." "What is that he is saying?" asked Nekhludoff, turning to the steward. "Der erste Dieb im Dorf, the greatest thief in the village," answered the steward in German. "He is caught stealing wood from the forest every year." Then, turning to the peasant, he added, "You must learn to respect other people's property." "Why, don't we respect you?" said the old man. "We are obliged to respect you. Why, you could twist us into a rope, we are in your hands." "Eh, my friend, it's impossible to do you. It's you who are ever ready to do us," said the steward. "Do you indeed? Didn't you smash my jaw for me, and I got nothing for it? No good going to law with the rich, it seems. You should keep to the law." A tournament of words was apparently going on without those who took part in it knowing exactly what it was all about, but it was noticeable that there was bitterness on one side, restricted by fear, and on the other a consciousness of importance and power. It was very trying to Nekhludoff to listen to all this, so he returned to the question of arranging the amount and the terms of the rent. "Well then, how about the land? Do you wish to take it, and what price will you pay if I let you have the whole of it?" "The property is yours. It is for you to fix the price." Nekhludoff named the price. Though it was far below that paid in the neighbourhood, the peasants declared it too high, and began bargaining, as is customary among them. Nekhludoff thought his offer would be accepted with pleasure, but no signs of pleasure were visible. One thing only showed Nekhludoff that his offer was a profitable one to the peasants. The question as to who would rent the land, the whole commune or a special society, was put, and a violent dispute arose among those peasants who were in favour of excluding the weak and those not likely to pay the rent regularly, and the peasants who would have to be excluded on that score. At last, thanks to the steward, the amount and the terms of the rent were fixed, and the peasants went down the hill towards their villages, talking noisily, while Nekhludoff and the steward went into the office to make up the agreement. Everything was settled in the way Nekhludoff wished and expected it to be. The peasants had their land 30% cheaper than they could have got it anywhere in the district. The revenue from the land was diminished by half, but was more than sufficient for Nekhludoff, especially as there would be money coming in for a forest he sold, as well as for the agricultural implements, which would be sold too. Everything seemed excellently arranged, yet he felt ashamed of something. He could see that the peasants, though they spoke words of thanks, were not satisfied, and had expected something greater. So it turned out that he had deprived himself of a great deal, and yet not done what the peasants had expected. The next day the agreement was signed, and accompanied by several old peasants, who had been chosen as deputies, Nekhludoff went out, got into the steward's elegant equipage, as the driver from the station had called it, said good-bye to the peasants, who stood shaking their heads in a dissatisfied and disappointed manner, and drove off to the station. Nekhludoff was dissatisfied with himself, without knowing why, but all the time he felt sad and ashamed of something. End of Book 2, Chapter 2. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 3. Old Associations. From Kuzminsky, Nekhludoff went to the estate he had inherited from his aunts, the same where he first met Katusha. He meant to arrange about the land there in the way he had done in Kuzminsky. Besides this, he wished to find out all he could about Katusha and her baby, and when and how it had died. He got to Panovo early one morning, and the first thing that struck him when he drove up was the look of decay and dilapidation that all the buildings bore, especially the house itself. The iron roofs, which had once been painted green, looked red with rust, and a few sheets of iron were bent back, probably by a storm. Some of the planks which covered the house from outside were torn away in several places. These were easier to get by breaking the rusty nails that held them. Both porches, but especially the side porch he remembered so well, were rotten and broken. Only the banister remained. Some of the windows were boarded up, and the building in which the foreman lived, the kitchen, the stables, all were grey and decaying. Only the garden had not decayed, but had grown, and was in full bloom. From over the fence the cherry, apple, and plum trees looked like white clouds. The lilac bushes that formed the hedge were in full bloom, as they had been when, 14 years ago, Nekhlyudov had played Gorelki with a 15-year-old Katusha, and had fallen and got his hand stung by the nettles behind one of those lilac bushes. The larch that his Aunt Sophia had planted near the house, which then was only a short stick, had grown into a tree, the trunk of which would have made a beam, and its branches were covered with soft yellow-green needles as with down. The river, now within its banks, rushed noisily over the mill dam. The meadow the other side of the river was dotted over by the peasants' mixed herds. The foreman, a student who had left the seminary without finishing the course, met Nekhlyudov in the yard with a smile on his face, and still smiling, asked him to come into the office, and, as if promising something exceptionally good by this smile, he went behind a partition. For a moment some whispering was heard behind the partition. The izvozchik who had driven Nekhlyudov from the station drove away after receiving a tip, and all was silent. Then a barefooted girl passed the window. She had on an embroidered peasant blouse, and long earrings in her ears. Then a man walked past, clattering with his nailed boots on the trodden path. Nekhlyudov sat down by the little casement, and looked out into the garden and listened. A soft, fresh spring breeze, smelling of newly dug earth, streamed in through the window, playing with the hair on his damp forehead and the papers that lay on the window-sill, which was all cut about with a knife. Trap-a-troop, trap-a-troop, comes a sound from the river, as the women who were washing clothes there slapped them in regular measure with their wooden bats, and the sound spread over the glittering surface of the mill pond, while the rhythmical sound of the falling water came from the mill, and a frightened fly suddenly flew loudly buzzing past his ear. And all at once Nekhlyudov remembered how, long ago, when he was young and innocent, he had heard the women's wooden bats slapping the wet clothes above the rhythmical sound from the mill, and in the same way the spring breeze had blown about the hair on his wet forehead and the papers on the window-sill, which was all cut about with a knife, and just in the same way a fly had buzzed loudly past his ear. It was not exactly that he remembered himself as the lad of 15, but he seemed to feel himself the same as he was then, with the same freshness and purity, and full of the same grand possibilities for the future, and at the same time, as it happens in a dream, he knew that all this could be no more, and he felt terribly sad. "At what time would you like something to eat?" asked the foreman with a smile. "When you like. I am not hungry. I shall go for a walk through the village." "Would you not like to come into the house?" "Everything is in order there. Have the goodness to look in, if the outside—" "Not now, later on. Tell me, please, have you got a woman here called Matrona Kharina?" This was Katusha's aunt, the village midwife. Oh, yes. In the village she keeps a secret pothouse. I know she does, and I accuse her of it, and scold her. But as to taking her up, it would be a pity. An old woman, you know. She has grandchildren," said the foreman, continuing to smile in the same manner, partly wishing to be pleasant to the master, and partly because he was convinced that Nekhludoff understood all these matters just as well as he did himself. "Where does she live? I shall go across and see her." "At the end of the village, the further side, the third from the end. To the left there is a brick cottage, and her hut is beyond that. But I'd better see you there," the foreman said with a graceful smile. "No, thanks, I shall find it. And you be so good as to call a meeting of the peasants, and tell them that I want to speak to them about the land," said Nekhludoff, with the intention of coming to the same agreement with the peasants here as he had done in Kousminski, and, if possible, that same evening. End of Book 2, Chapter 3. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 4. The Peasant's Lot. When Nekhludoff came out of the gate, he met the girl with the long earrings on the well-trodden path that lay across the pasture ground, overgrown with dock and plantain leaves. She had a long, brightly coloured apron on, and was quickly swinging her left arm in front of herself as she stepped briskly with her fat, bare feet. With her right arm she was pressing a fowl to her stomach. The fowl, with red comb shaking, seemed perfectly calm. He only rolled up his eyes and stretched out and drew in one black leg, clawing the girl's apron. When the girl came nearer to "the master," she began moving more slowly, and her run changed into a walk. When she came up to him she stopped, and, after a backward jerk with her head, bowed to him, and only when he had passed did she recommence to run homeward with the cock. As he went down toward the well, he met an old woman, who had a coarse dirty blouse on, carrying 2 pails full of water, that hung on a yoke across her bent back. The old woman carefully put down the pails and bowed, with the same backward jerk of her head. After passing the well, Nekhludoff entered the village. It was a bright hot day, and oppressive, though only 10 o'clock. At intervals the sun was hidden by the gathering clouds. An unpleasant, sharp smell of manure filled the air in the street. It came from carts going up the hillside, but chiefly from the disturbed manure heaps in the yards of the huts, by the open gates of which Nekhludoff had to pass. The peasants, barefooted, their shirts and trousers soiled with manure, turned to look at the tall, stout gentleman with a glossy silk ribbon on his grey hat, who was walking up the village street, touching the ground every other step with a shiny, bright-knobbed walking stick. The peasants returning from the fields at a trot and jotting in their empty carts took off their hats, and in their surprise followed with their eyes the extraordinary man who was walking up their street. The women came out of the gates or stood in the porches of their huts, pointing him out to each other and gazing at him as he passed. When Nekhludoff was passing the 4th gate, he was stopped by a cart that was coming out, its wheels creaking, loaded high with manure, which was pressed down and was covered with a mat to sit on. A 6-year-old boy, excited by the prospect of a drive, followed the cart. A young peasant, with shoes plaited out of bark on his feet, led the horse out of the yard. A long-legged colt jumped out of the gate, but seeing Nekhludoff, pressed close to the cart, and scraping its legs against the wheels, jumped forward, past its excited, gently neighing mother, as she was dragging the heavy load through the gateway. The next horse was led out by a barefooted old man, with protruding shoulder blades, in a dirty shirt and striped trousers. When the horses got out onto the hard road, strewn over with bits of dry, grey manure, the old man returned to the gate and bowed to Nekhlyudov. "You are Our Lady's nephew, aren't you?" "Yes, I am their nephew." "You've kindly come to look us up, eh?" said the garrulous old man. "Yes, I have." "Well, how are you getting on?" "How do we get on? We get on very badly," the old man drawled, as if it gave him pleasure. "Why so badly?" Nekhlyudov asked, stepping inside the gate. "What is our life but the very worst life?" said the old man, following Nekhlyudov into that part of the yard which was roofed over. Nekhlyudov stopped under the roof. "I have got 12 of them there," continued the old man, pointing to 2 women on the remainder of the manure heap, who stood perspiring with forks in their hands, the kerchiefs tumbling off their heads, with their skirts tucked up, showing the calves of their dirty bare legs. "Not a month passes but I have to buy 6 poods (a pood is 36 English pounds) of corn, and where's the money to come from? Have you not got enough corn of your own?" "My own?" repeated the old man, with a smile of contempt. "Why, I've only got land for 3, and last year we had not enough to last till Christmas." "What do you do then?" "What do we do? Why, I hire out as a labourer, and then I borrowed some money from your honour. We spent it all before Lent, and the tax is not paid yet." "And how much is the tax?" "Why, it's 17 roubles for my household. Oh Lord, such a life! One hardly knows oneself how one manages to live it." "May I go into your hut?" asked Nekhlyudov, stepping across the yard over the yellow-brown layers of manure that had been raked up by the forks and were giving off a strong smell. "Why not? Come in," said the old man, and stepping quickly with his bare feet over the manure, the liquid oozing between his toes, he passed Nekhlyudov and opened the door of the hut. The women arranged the kerchiefs on their heads and let down their skirts, and stood looking with surprise at the clean gentleman with gold studs to his sleeves, who was entering their house. 2 little girls, with nothing on but coarse chemises, rushed out of the hut. Nekhlyudov took off his hat, and stooping to get through the low door, entered, through a passage into the dirty, narrow hut that smelt of sour food, and where much space was taken up by 2 weaving looms. In the hut an old woman was standing by the stove, with the sleeves rolled up over her thin, sinewy brown arms. "Here is our master come to see us," said the old man. "I'm sure he's very welcome," said the old woman kindly. "I would like to see how you live." "Well, you see how we live. The hut is coming down, and might kill one any day, but my old man he says it's good enough, and so we live like kings," said the brisk old woman, nervously jerking her head. "I'm getting the dinner going to feed the workers." "And what are you going to have for dinner?" "Our food is very good. First course, bread and kvass. Kvass is a kind of sour, non-intoxicant beer made of rye." "Second course, kvass and bread," said the old woman, showing her teeth, which were half worn away. "No, seriously, let me see what you are going to eat." "To eat?" said the old man, laughing. "Ours is not a very cunning meal. You just show him, wife. Want to see our peasant food? Well, you are an inquisitive gentleman, now I come to look at you. He wants to know everything. Did I not tell you bread and kvass, and then we'll have soup? A woman brought us some fish, and that's what the soup is made of, and after that potatoes." "Nothing more?" "What more do you want? We'll also have a little milk," said the old woman, looking towards the door. The door stood open, and the passage outside was full of people, boys, girls, women with babies, thronged together to look at the strange gentleman who wanted to see the peasants' food. The old woman seemed to pride herself on the way she behaved with the gentleman. "Yes, it's a miserable life, ours. That goes without saying, sir," said the old man. "What are you doing there?" he shouted to those in the passage. "Well, good bye," said Nekhlyudov, feeling ashamed and uneasy, though unable to account for the feeling. "Thank you kindly for having looked us up," said the old man. The people in the passage pressed closer together to let Nekhlyudov pass, and he went out and continued his way up the street. Two barefooted boys followed him out of the passage, the elder in a shirt which had once been white, the other in a worn and faded pink one. Nekhlyudov looked back at them. "And where are you going now?" asked the boy with a white shirt. Nekhlyudov answered, "To Matrona Kharina. Do you know her?" The boy with the pink shirt began laughing at something, but the elder asked seriously, "What Matrona is that? Is she old?" "Yes, she is old." "Oh, he drawled. "That one. She's at the other end of the village. We'll show you. Yes, Fedka, we'll go with him, shall we?" "Yes, but the horses?" "They'll be all right, I dare say." Fedka agreed, and all three went up the street. End of Book 2, Chapter 4. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 5. Maslova's Aunt. Nekhlyudov felt more at ease with the boys than with the grown-up people, and he began talking to them as they went along. The little one with the pink shirt stopped laughing, and spoke as sensibly and as exactly as the elder one. "Can you tell me who are the poorest people you have got here?" asked Nekhlyudov. "The poorest? Michael is poor, Simon Makrov, and Martha, she is very poor. And Anisia, she is still poorer. She's not even got a cow." "They go begging," said little Fedka. "She's not got a cow, but they are only 3 persons, and Martha's family are 5, objected the elder boy. "But the other's a widow," the pink boy said, standing up for Anisia. "You say Anisia is a widow, and Martha is no better than a widow," said the elder boy. "She's also no husband." "And where is her husband?" Nekhlyudov asked. "Feeding vermin in prison," said the elder boy, using this expression, common among the peasants. "A year ago he cut down 2 birch trees in the landlord's forest," the little pink boy hurried to say. "So he was locked up. Now he's sitting the 6th month there, and the wife goes begging. There are 3 children and a sick grandmother," he went on with his detailed account. "And where does she live?" Nekhlyudov asked. "In this very house," answered the boy, pointing to a hut in front of which, on the footpath along which Nekhlyudov was walking, a tiny, flaxen-headed infant stood balancing himself with difficulty on his rickety legs. "Vaska, where's the little scamp got to?" shouted a woman with a dirty grey blouse and a frightened look, as she ran out of the house and, rushing forward, seized the baby before Nekhlyudov came up to it and carried it in, just as if she were afraid that Nekhlyudov would hurt her child. This was the woman whose husband was imprisoned for Nekhlyudov's birch trees. "Well, and this Matrona, is she also poor?" Nekhlyudov asked as they came up to Matrona's house. "She poor? No. Why, she sells spirits," the thin, pink little boy answered decidedly. When they reached the house, Nekhlyudov left the boys outside and went through the passage into the hut. The hut was 14 feet long. The bed that stood behind the big stove was not long enough for a tall person to stretch out on. And on this very bed, Nekhlyudov thought, Katusha bore her baby and lay ill afterwards. The greater part of the hut was taken up by a loom, on which the old woman and her eldest granddaughter were arranging the warp when Nekhlyudov came in, striking his forehead against the low doorway. 2 other grandchildren came rushing in after Nekhlyudov, and stopped, holding on to the lintels of the door. "Whom do you want?" asked the old woman crossly. She was in a bad temper because she could not manage to get the warp right, and besides carrying on an illicit trade in spirits, she was always afraid when any stranger came in. I am the owner of the neighbouring estates, and should like to speak to you. Dear me, why it's you, my honey, and I, fool, thought it was just some passer-by. Dear me, you! It's you, my precious, said the old woman, with simulated tenderness in her voice. I should like to speak to you alone, said Nekhlyudov, with a glance towards the door, where the children were standing, and behind them a woman holding a wasted, pale baby, with a sickly smile on its face, who had a little cap made of different bits of stuff on its head. What are you staring at? I'll give it you. Just hand me my crutch, the old woman shouted to those at the door. Shut the door, will you? The children went away, and the woman closed the door. And I was thinking, who's that? And it's the master himself. My jewel, my treasure. Just think, said the old woman, where he has deigned to come. Sit down here, your honour, she said, wiping the seat with her apron. And I was thinking what devil is it coming in, and it's your honour. The master himself, the good gentleman, our benefactor. Forgive me, old fool that I am. I'm getting blind. Nekhlyudov sat down, and the old woman stood in front of him, leaning her cheek on her right hand, while the left held up the sharp elbow of her right arm. Dear me, you have grown old, your honour, and you used to be as fresh as a daisy, and now cares also, I expect. This is what I have come about. Do you remember Katusha Maslova? Katerina? I should think so. Why, she is my niece. How could I help remembering, and the tears I have shed because of her? Why, I know all about it. Eh, sir, who has not sinned before God? Who has not offended against the Tsar? You know what youth is. You used to be drinking tea and coffee, so the devil got hold of you. He is strong at times. What's to be done? Now if you had chucked her, but no, just see how you rewarded her, gave her 100 roubles. And she, what has she done? Had she but listened to me, she might have lived all right. I must say the truth, though she is my niece, that girl's no good. What a good place I found her. She would not submit, but amused her master. Is it for the likes of us to scold gentlefolk? Well, she was sent away. And then at the Foresters. She might have lived there, but no, she would not. I want to know about the child. She was confined at your house, was she not? Where's the child? As to the child, I considered that well at the time. She was so bad I never thought she would get up again. Well, so I christened the baby quite properly, and we sent it to the foundlings. Why should one let an innocent soul languish when the mother is dying? Others do like this. They just leave the baby, don't feed it, and it wastes away. But thinks I, no. I'd rather take some trouble, and send it to the foundlings. There was money enough, so I sent it off. Did you not get its registration number from the foundlings' hospital? Yes, there was a number, but the baby died, she said. It died as soon as she brought it there. Who is she? The same woman who used to live in Skorodno. She made a business of it. Her name was Melania. She's dead now. She was a wise woman. What do you think she used to do? They'd bring her a baby, and she'd keep it and feed it. And she'd feed it until she had enough of them to take to the foundlings. When she had 3 or 4, she'd take them all at once. She had such a clever arrangement, a sort of big cradle. A double one. She could put them in one way or the other. It had a handle. So she'd put 4 of them in, feet to feet and the heads apart, so that they should not knock against each other. And so she took 4 at once. She'd put some pap in a rag into their mouths to keep them silent, the pets. Well, go on. Well, she took Katerina's baby in the same way, after keeping it a fortnight, I believe. It was in her house it began to sicken. And was it a fine baby? Nekhlyudov asked. Such a baby that if you wanted a finer, you could not find one. Your very image, the old woman added with a wink. Why did it sicken? Was the food bad? Eh, what food? Only just a pretence of food. Naturally, when it's not one's own child. Only enough to get it there alive. She said she just managed to get it to Moscow, and there it died. She brought a certificate, all in order. She was such a wise woman." That was all Nekhlyudov could find out concerning his child. End of Book 2, Chapter 5. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 6. Reflections of a Landlord. Again striking his head against both doors, Nekhlyudov went out into the street, where the pink and the white boys were waiting for him. A few newcomers were standing with them. Among the women, of whom several had babies in their arms, was the thin woman with the baby who had the patchwork cap on its head. She held lightly in her arms the bloodless infant, who kept strangely smiling all over its wizened little face, and continually moving its crooked thumbs. Nekhlyudov knew the smile to be one of suffering. He asked who the woman was. "It is that very Anisia I told you about," said the elder boy. Nekhlyudov turned to Anisia. "How do you live?" he asked. "By what means do you gain your livelihood?" "How do I live? I go begging," said Anisia, and began to cry. Nekhlyudov took out his pocket-book and gave the woman a 10-rouble note. He had not had time to take 2 steps before another woman with a baby caught him up, then an old woman, then another young one. All of them spoke of their poverty and asked for help. Nekhlyudov gave them the 60 roubles, all in small notes, which he had with him, and terribly sad at heart, turned home, i.e. to the foreman's house. The foreman met Nekhlyudov with a smile, and informed him that the peasants would come to the meeting in the evening. Nekhlyudov thanked him, and went straight into the garden to stroll along the paths, strewn over with the petals of apple blossom and overgrown with weeds, and to think over all he had seen. At first all was quiet, but soon Nekhlyudov heard from behind the foreman's house 2 angry women's voices interrupting each other, and now and then the voice of the ever-smiling foreman. Nekhlyudov listened. "My strength's at an end. What are you about, dragging the very cross? Those baptized in the Russo-Greek church always wear a cross round their necks." "Off my neck," said an angry woman's voice. "But she only got it in for a moment," said another voice. "Give it her back, I tell you. Why do you torment the beast, and the children too, who want their milk?" "Pay then, or work it off," said the foreman's voice. Nekhlyudov left the garden and entered the porch, near which stood 2 dishevelled women, one of them pregnant and evidently near her time. On one of the steps of the porch, with his hands in the pockets of his holland coat, stood the foreman. When they saw the master, the women were silent, and began arranging the kerchiefs on their heads, and the foreman took his hands out of his pockets and began to smile. This is what had happened. From the foreman's words, it seemed that the peasants were in the habit of letting their calves and even their cows into the meadow belonging to the estate. 2 cows belonging to the families of these 2 women were found in the meadow and driven into the yard. The foreman demanded from the women 30 kopecks for each cow, or 2 days' work. The women, however, maintained that the cows had got into the meadow of their own accord, that they had no money, and asked that the cows, which had stood in the blazing sun since morning without food, piteously lowing, should be returned to them, even if it had to be on the understanding that the price should be worked off later on. "How often have I not begged of you," said the smiling foreman, looking back at Nekhlyudov, as if calling upon him to be a witness. "If you drive your cattle home at noon, then you should have an eye on them. I only ran to my little one for a bit, and they got away." "Don't run away when you have undertaken to watch the cows." "And who's to feed the little one? You'd not give him the breast, I suppose," said the other woman. Now if they had really damaged the meadow, one would not take it so much to heart, but they only strayed in a moment. "All the meadows are damaged," the foreman said, turning to Nekhlyudov. "If I exact no penalty there will be no hay." "There now, don't go sinning like that. My cows have never been caught there before," shouted the pregnant woman. "Now that one has been caught. Pay up or work it off." "All right, I'll work it off. Only let me have the cow now. Don't torture her with hunger," she cried, angrily. "As it is, I have no rest day or night. Mother-in-law is ill, husband taken to drink. I am all alone to do all the work, and my strength at an end. I wish you'd choke, you and your working it off." Nekhlyudov asked the foreman to let the women take the cows, and went back into the garden to go on thinking out his problem. But there was nothing more to think about. Everything seemed so clear to him now that he could not stop wondering how it was that everybody did not see it, and that he himself had for such a long time not seen what was so clearly evident. The people were dying out, and had got used to the dying out process, and had formed habits of life adapted to this process. There was the great mortality among the children, the overworking of the women, the underfeeding, especially of the aged. And so gradually had the people come to this condition that they did not realize the full horrors of it, and did not complain. Therefore we consider their condition natural, and as it should be. Now it seemed as clear as daylight that the chief cause of the people's great want was one that they themselves knew and always pointed out, i.e., that the land which alone could feed them had been taken from them by the landlords. And how evident it was that the children and the aged died because they had no milk, and they had no milk because there was no pasture land, and no land to grow corn or make hay on. It was quite evident that all the misery of the people, or, at least by far the greater part of it, was caused by the fact that the land which should feed them was not in their hands, but in the hands of those who, profiting by their rights to the land, live by the work of these people. The land so much needed by men was tilled by these people, who were on the verge of starvation, so that the corn might be sold abroad, and the owners of the land might buy themselves hats and canes, and carriages and bronzes, etc. He understood this as clearly as he understood that horses, when they have eaten all the grass in the enclosure where they are kept, will have to grow thin and starve unless they are put out where they can get food off other land. This was terrible and must not go on. Means must be found to alter it, or at least not to take part in it. And I will find them, he thought, as he walked up and down on the path under the birch trees. In scientific circles, government institutions, and in the papers, we talk about the causes of the poverty among the people, and the means of ameliorating their condition. But we do not talk of the only sure means, which would certainly lighten their condition, i.e., giving back to them the land they need so much. Henry George's fundamental position recurred vividly to his mind, and how he had once been carried away by it, and he was surprised that he could have forgotten it. The earth cannot be any one's property. It cannot be bought and sold any more than water, air, or sunshine. All have an equal right to the advantages it gives to men. And now he knew why he felt ashamed to remember the transaction at Kuzminsky. He had been deceiving himself. He knew that no man could have a right to own land, yet he had accepted this right as his, and had given the peasants something which, in the depth of his heart, he knew he had no right to. Now he would not act in this way, and would alter the arrangement in Kuzminsky also. And he formed a project in his mind to let the land to the peasants, and to acknowledge the rent they paid for it to be their property, to be kept to pay the taxes and for communal uses. This was, of course, not the single tax system. Still it was as near an approach to it as could be had under existing circumstances. His chief consideration, however, was that in this way he would no longer profit by the possession of landed property. When he returned to the house, the foreman, with a specially pleasant smile, asked him if he would not have his dinner now, expressing the fear that the feast his wife was preparing, with the help of the girl with the earrings, might be overdone. The table was covered with a coarse unbleached cloth, and an embroidered towel was laid on it in lieu of a napkin. A Vier Sachs soup tureen with a broken handle stood on the table, full of potato soup, the stock made of the fowl that had put out and drawn in his black leg, and was now cut, or rather chopped in pieces, which were here and there covered with hairs. After the soup, more of the same fowl with the hairs was served roasted, and then curd pasties, very greasy, and with a great deal of sugar. Little appetizing as all this was, Nekhlyudov hardly noticed what he was eating. He was occupied with the thought which had in a moment dispersed the sadness with which he had returned from the village. The foreman's wife kept looking in at the door, whilst the frightened maid with the earrings brought in the dishes, and the foreman smiled more and more joyfully, priding himself on his wife's culinary skill. After dinner, Nekhlyudov succeeded, with some trouble, in making the foreman sit down. In order to revise his own thoughts, and to express them to some one, he explained his project of letting the land to the peasants, and asked the foreman for his opinion. The foreman, smiling as if he had thought all this himself long ago, and was very pleased to hear it, did not really understand it at all. This was not because Nekhlyudov did not express himself clearly, but because according to this project it turned out that Nekhlyudov was giving up his own profit for the profit of others, and the thought that every one is only concerned about his own profit to the harm of others was so deeply rooted in the foreman's conceptions that he imagined he did not understand something when Nekhlyudov said that all the income from the land must be placed to form the communal capital of the peasants. "Oh, I see. Then you, of course, will receive the percentages from that capital," said the foreman, brightening up. "Dear me, no. Don't you see, I am giving up the land altogether." "But then you will not get any income," said the foreman, smiling no longer. "Yes, I am going to give it up." The foreman sighed heavily, and then began smiling again. Now he understood. He understood that Nekhlyudov was not quite normal, and at once began to consider how he himself could profit by Nekhlyudov's project of giving up the land, and tried to see this project in such a way that he might reap some advantage from it. But when he saw that this was impossible, he grew sorrowful, and the project ceased to interest him, and he continued to smile only in order to please the master. Seeing that the foreman did not understand him, Nekhlyudov let him go, and sat down by the window-sill, that was all cut about and inked over, and began to put his project down on paper. The sun went down behind the limes that were covered with fresh green, and the mosquitoes swarmed in, stinging Nekhlyudov. Just as he finished his notes, he heard the lowing of cattle and the creaking of opening gates from the village, and the voices of the peasants gathering together for the meeting. He told the foreman not to call the peasants up to the office, as he meant to go into the village himself and meet the men where they would assemble. Having hurriedly drunk a cup of tea offered him by the foreman, Nekhlyudov went to the village. End of Book 2, Chapter 6. Massachusetts. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 7. The Disinherited. From the crowd assembled in front of the house of the village elder came the sound of voices. But as soon as Nekhlyudov came up the talking ceased, and all the peasants took off their caps just as those in Kuzminsky had done. The peasants here were of a much poorer class than those in Kuzminsky. The men wore shoes made of bark and homespun shirts and coats. Some had come straight from their work in their shirts and with bare feet. Nekhlyudov made an effort, and began his speech by telling the peasants of his intention to give up his land to them altogether. The peasants were silent, and the expression on their faces did not undergo any change. "Because I hold," said Nekhlyudov, "and believe that every one has a right to the use of the land." "That's certain, that's so exactly," said several voices. Nekhlyudov went on to say that the revenue from the land ought to be divided among all, and that he would therefore suggest that they should rent the land at a price fixed by themselves, the rent to form a communal fund for their own use. Words of approval and agreement were still to be heard, but the serious faces of the peasants grew still more serious, and the eyes that had been fixed on the gentleman dropped, as if they were unwilling to put him to shame by letting him see that every one had understood his trick, and that no one would be deceived by him. Nekhlyudov spoke clearly, and the peasants were intelligent, but they did not and could not understand him, for the same reason that the foreman had so long been unable to understand him. They were fully convinced that it is natural for every man to consider his own interest. The experience of many generations had proved to them that the landlords always considered their own interest to the detriment of the peasants. Therefore, if a landlord called them to a meeting and made them some kind of a new offer, it could evidently only be in order to swindle them more cunningly than before. "Well then, what are you willing to rent the land at?" asked Nekhlyudov. "How can we fix a price? We cannot do it. The land is yours, and the power is in your hands," answered some voices from among the crowd. "Oh, not at all. You will yourselves have the use of the money for communal purposes." "We cannot do it. The commune is one thing, and this is another." "Don't you understand?" said the foreman, with a smile. He had followed Nekhlyudov to the meeting. "The prince is letting the land to you for money, and is giving you the money back to form a capital for the commune." "We understand very well," said a cross, toothless old man, without raising his eyes. "Something like a bank. We should have to pay at a fixed time. We do not wish it. It is hard enough as it is, and that would ruin us completely." "That's no go. We prefer to go on the old way," began several dissatisfied and even rude voices. The refusals grew very vehement when Nekhlyudov mentioned that he would draw up an agreement which would have to be signed by him and by them. "Why sign? We shall go on working as we have done hitherto. What is all this for? We are ignorant men. We can't agree, because this sort of thing is not what we have been used to. As it was, so let it continue to be. Only the seeds we should like to withdraw." This meant that under the present arrangement the seeds had to be provided by the peasants, and they wanted the landlord to provide them. "Then am I to understand that you refuse to accept the land?" Nekhlyudov asked, addressing a middle-aged, barefooted peasant with a tattered coat and a bright look on his face, who was holding his worn cap with his left hand, in a peculiarly straight position, in the same way soldiers hold theirs when commanded to take them off. "Just so," said this peasant, who had evidently not yet rid himself of the military hypnotism he had been subjected to while serving his time. "It means that you have sufficient land," said Nekhlyudov. "No, sir, we have not," said the ex-soldier, with an artificially pleased look, carefully holding his tattered cap in front of him, as if offering it to any one who liked to make use of it. "Well, anyhow, you'd better think over what I have said." Nekhlyudov spoke with surprise, and again repeated his offer. "We have no need to think about it. As we have said, so it will be," angrily muttered the morose, toothless old man. "I shall remain here another day, and if you change your minds, Send to let me know." The peasants gave no answer. So Nekhlyudov did not succeed in arriving at any result from this interview. "If I might make a remark, Prince," said the foreman when they got home, "you will never come to any agreement with them. They are so obstinate. At a meeting these people just stick in one place, and there is no moving them. It is because they are frightened of everything. Why, these very peasants, say that white-haired one or the dark one who are refusing, are intelligent peasants. When one of them comes to the office and one makes him sit down to a cup of tea, it's like in the Palace of Wisdom. He is quite diplomatist," said the foreman, smiling. "He will consider everything rightly. At a meeting it's a different man. He keeps repeating one and the same—" "Well, could not some of the more intelligent men be asked to come here?" said Nekhlyudov. "I would carefully explain it to them." "That can be done," said the smiling foreman. "Well then, would you mind calling them here to-morrow?" "Oh, certainly I will," said the foreman, and smiled still more joyfully. "I shall call them to-morrow." "Just hear him. He's not artful, not he," said a black-haired peasant with an unkempt beard, as he sat jolting from side to side on a well-fed mare, addressing an old man in a torn coat who rode by his side. The two men were driving a herd of the peasants' horses to graze in the night, alongside the high road and secretly in the landlord's forest. "Give you the land for nothing? You need only sign. Have they not done the likes of us often enough? No, my friend, none of your humbug. Nowadays we have a little sense," he added, and began shouting at a colt that had strayed. He stopped his horse and looked round, but the colt had not remained behind. It had gone into the meadow by the roadside. "Bother that son of a Turk! He's taken to getting into the landowner's meadows," said the dark peasant with the unkempt beard, hearing the crackling of the sorrel stalks that the neighing colt was galloping over as he came running back from the scented meadow. "Do you hear the cracking? We'll have to send the women folk to weed the meadow when there's a holiday," said the thin peasant with the torn coat, "or else we'll blunt our scythes." "Sign, he says." The unkempt man continued giving his opinion of the landlord's speech. "Sign, indeed, and let him swallow you up." "That's certain," answered the old man. And then they were silent, and the tramping of the horses' feet along the high road was the only sound to be heard. End of Book 2, Chapter 7. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 8. God's Peace in the Heart. When Nekhlyudov returned, he found that the office had been arranged as a bedroom for him. A high bedstead, with a feather bed and two large pillows, had been placed in the room. The bed was covered with a dark red, double-bedded silk quilt, which was elaborately and finely quilted, and very stiff. It evidently belonged to the trousseau of the foreman's wife. The foreman offered Nekhlyudov the remains of the dinner, which the latter refused, and, excusing himself for the poorness of the fare and the accommodation, he left Nekhlyudov alone. The peasant's refusal did not at all bother Nekhlyudov. On the contrary, though as Kuzminsky his offer had been accepted, and he had even been thanked for it, and here he was met with suspicion and even enmity, he felt contented and joyful. It was close and dirty in the office. Nekhlyudov went out into the yard and was going into the garden, but he remembered that night the window of the maidservant's room, the side porch, and he felt uncomfortable, and did not like to pass the spot desecrated by guilty memories. He sat down on the doorstep, and breathing in the warm air, balmy with the strong scent of fresh birch leaves, he sat for a long time looking into the dark garden, and listening to the mill, the nightingales, and some other bird that whistled monotonously in the bush close by. The light disappeared from the foreman's window. In the east, behind the barn, appeared the light of the rising moon, and sheet lightning began to light up the dilapidated house, and the blooming, overgrown garden more and more frequently. It began to thunder in the distance, and a black cloud spread over 1/3 of the sky. The nightingales and the other birds were silent. Above the murmur of the water from the mill came the cackling of geese, and then in the village and in the foreman's yard the first cocks began to crow earlier than usual, as they do on warm, thundery nights. There is a saying that if the cocks crow early, the night will be a merry one. For Nekhlyudov the night was more than merry. It was a happy, joyful night. Imagination renewed the impressions of that happy summer which he had spent here as an innocent lad, and he felt himself as he had been not only at that, but at all the best moments of his life. He not only remembered, but felt as he had felt when, at the age of 14, he prayed that God would show him the truth, or when, as a child, he had wept on his mother's lap when parting from her, and promising to be always good, and never give her pain. He felt as he did when he and Nikolenka Ertenieff resolved always to support each other in living a good life, and to try to make everybody happy. He remembered how he had been tempted in Kuzminsky, so that he had begun to regret the house, and the forest, and the farm, and the land, and he asked himself if he regretted them now, and it even seemed strange to think that he could regret them. He remembered all that he had seen today, the woman with the children, and without her husband, who was in prison for having cut down trees in his, Nekhlyudov's forest, and the terrible Matrona who considered, or at least talked as if she considered, that women of her position must give themselves to the gentlefolk. He remembered her relation to the babies, the way in which they were taken to the Foundlings' Hospital, and the unfortunate, smiling, wizened baby with the patchwork cap dying of starvation. And then he suddenly remembered the prison, the shaved heads, the cells, the disgusting smells, the chains, and, by the side of it all, the madly lavish city life of the rich, himself included. The bright moon, now almost full, rose above the barn. Dark shadows fell across the yard, and the iron roof of the ruined house shone bright. As if unwilling to waste this light, the nightingales again began their trills. Nekhlyudov called to mind how he had begun to consider his life in the garden of Kuzminsky when deciding what he was going to do, and remembered how confused he had become, how he could not arrive at any decision, how many difficulties each question had presented. He asked himself these questions now, and was surprised how simple it all was. It was simple, but he was not thinking now of what would be the results for himself, but only thought of what he had to do. And, strange to say, what he had to do for himself he could not decide, but what he had to do for others he knew without any doubt. He had no doubt that he must not leave Katusha, but go on helping her. He had no doubt that he must study, investigate, clear up, understand all this business concerning judgment and punishment, which he felt he saw differently to other people. What would result from it all he did not know, but he knew for certain that he must do it, and this firm assurance gave him joy. The black cloud had spread all over the sky. The lightning flashed vividly across the yard, and in the old house with its tumble-down porches the thunder growled overhead. All the birds were silent, but the leaves rustled and the wind reached the step where Nekhlyudov stood and played with his hair. One drop came down, then another. Then they came drumming on the dock leaves and on the iron of the roof, and all the air was filled by a bright flash, and before Nekhlyudov could count 3, A fearful crash sounded overhead and spread pealing over all the sky. Nekhlyudov went in. Yes, yes, he thought, the work that our life accomplishes, the whole of this work, the meaning of it is not, nor can be, intelligible to me. What were my aunts for? Why did Nikolenka Erteniev die? Why am I living? What was Katusha for? And my madness? Why that war? Why my subsequent lawless life? To understand it, to understand the whole of the Master's will, is not in my power. But to do his will, that is written down in my conscience, is in my power. That I know for certain. And when I am fulfilling it, I have sureness and peace. The rain came down in torrents and rushed from the roof into a tub beneath. The lightning lit up the house and yard less frequently. Nekhlyudov went into his room, undressed and lay down, not without fear of the bugs, whose presence the dirty, torn wall-papers made him suspect. Yes, to feel oneself not the master but a servant, he thought, and rejoiced at the thought. His fears were not vain. Hardly had he put out his candle when the vermin attacked and stung him. To give up the land and go to Siberia, fleas, bugs, dirt, ah well, if it must be borne, I shall bear it. But in spite of the best intentions he could not bear it, and sat down by the open window and gazed with admiration at the retreating clouds and the reappearing moon. End of Book 2, Chapter 8.
By Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 9. The Land Settlement. It was morning before Nekhlyudov could fall asleep, and therefore he woke up late. At noon 7 men, chosen from among the peasants at the foreman's invitation, came into the orchard where the foreman had arranged a table and benches by digging posts into the ground and fixing boards on the top under the apple trees. It took some time before the peasants could be persuaded to put on their caps and to sit down on the benches. Especially firm was the ex-soldier, who today had bark shoes on. He stood erect, holding his cap as they do at funerals, according to military regulation. When one of them, a respectable-looking, broad-shouldered old man with a curly, grizzly beard like that of Michelangelo's Moses, and grey hair that curled round the brown, bold forehead, put on his big cap, and, wrapping his coat round him, got in behind the table and sat down. The rest followed his example. When all had taken their places, Nekhlyudov sat down opposite them, and leaning on the table over the paper on which he had drawn up his project, he began explaining it. Whether it was that there were fewer present, or that he was occupied with the business in hand and not with himself, anyhow, this time Nekhlyudov felt no confusion. He involuntarily addressed the broad-shouldered old man with white ringlets in his grizzly beard, expecting approbation or objections from him. But Nekhlyudov's conjecture was wrong. The respectable-looking old patriarch, though he nodded his handsome head approvingly, or shook it and frowned when the others raised an objection, evidently understood with great difficulty, and only when the others repeated what Nekhlyudov had said in their own words. A little, almost beardless old fellow, blind in one eye, who sat by the side of the patriarch, and had a patched nankeen coat and old boots on, and, as Nekhlyudov found out later, was an oven builder, understood much better. This man moved his brows quickly, attending to Nekhlyudov's words with an effort, and at once repeated them in his own way. An old, thick-set man with a white beard and intelligent eyes understood as quickly, and took every opportunity to put in an ironical joke, clearly wishing to show off. The ex-soldier seemed also to understand matters, but got mixed, being used to senseless soldiers' talk. A tall man with a small beard, a long nose, and a bass voice, who wore clean, home-made clothes, and new bark-plaited shoes, seemed to be the one most seriously interested. This man spoke only when there was need of it. The two other men, the same toothless one who had shouted a distinct refusal at the meeting the day before to every proposal of Nekhlyudov's, and a tall, white, lame old man with a kind face, his thin legs tightly wrapped around with strips of linen, said little, though they listened attentively. First of all Nekhlyudov explained his views in regard to personal property in land. The land, according to my idea, can neither be bought nor sold, because if it could be, he who has got the money could buy it all, and exact anything he liked for the use of the land from those who have none. "That's true," said the long-nosed man in a deep bass. "Just so," said the ex-soldier. "A woman gathers a little grass for her cow. She's caught and imprisoned," said the white-bearded old man. "Our own land is 5 versts away, and as to renting any, it's impossible. The price is raised so high that it won't pay," added the cross, toothless old man. "They twist us into ropes, worse than during serfdom." "I think as you do, and I count it a sin to possess land, so I wish to give it away," said Nekhlyudov. "Well, that's a good thing," said the old man with curls like Angelo's Moses, evidently thinking that Nekhlyudov meant to let the land. "I have come here because I no longer wish to possess any land, and now we must consider the best way of dividing it." "Just give it to the peasants, that's all," said the cross, toothless old man. Nekhlyudov was abashed for a moment, feeling a suspicion of his not being honest in these words, but he instantly recovered and made use of the remark in order to express what was in his mind, in reply. "I should be glad to give it to them," he said, "but to whom and how? To which of the peasants? Why, to your commune and not to that of Deminsk." That was the name of a neighboring village with very little land. All were silent. Then the ex-soldier said, "Just so." "Now, then, tell me how would you divide the land among the peasants if you had to do it?" said Nekhlyudov. "We should divide it up equally, so much for every man," said the oven builder, quickly raising and lowering his brows. "How else? Of course, so much per man," said the good-natured lame man with the white strips of linen around his legs. Everyone confirmed this statement, considering it satisfactory. "So much per man? Then are the servants attached to the house also to have a share?" Nekhlyudov asked. "Oh, no," said the ex-soldier, trying to appear bold and merry. But the tall, reasonable man would not agree with him. "If one is to divide, all must share alike," he said in his deep bass, after a little consideration. "It can't be done," said Nekhlyudov, who had already prepared his reply. "If all are to share alike, then those who do not work themselves, do not plough, will sell their shares to the rich. The rich will again get at the land. Those who live by working the land will multiply, and land will again be scarce. Then the rich will again get those who need land into their power." "Just so," quickly said the ex-soldier. "Forbid to sell the land, let only him who ploughs it have it," angrily interrupted the oven builder. To this Nekhlyudov replied that it was impossible to know who was ploughing for himself and who for another. The tall, reasonable man proposed that an arrangement be made so that they should all plough communally, and those who ploughed should get the produce, and those who did not should get nothing. To this communistic project Nekhlyudov had also an answer ready. He said that for such an arrangement it would be necessary that all should have ploughs, and that all the horses should be alike, so that none should be left behind, and that ploughs and horses and all the implements would have to be communal property, and that in order to get that, all the people would have to agree. "Our people could not be made to agree in a lifetime," said the cross old man. "We should have regular fights," said the white-bearded old man with the laughing eyes. "So that the thing is not as simple as it looks," said Nekhlyudov, "and this is a thing not only we, but many have been considering. There is an American, Henry George. This is what he has thought out, and I agree with him." "Why, you are the master, and you give it as you like." "What's it to you? The power is yours," said the cross old man. This confused Nekhludoff, but he was pleased to see that not he alone was dissatisfied with this interruption. "You wait a bit, Uncle Simon. Let him tell us about it," said the reasonable man in his imposing bass. This emboldened Nekhludoff, and he began to explain Henry George's single tax system. "The earth is no man's, it is God's," he began. "Just so, that it is," several voices replied. "The land is common to all have the same right to it. But there is good land and bad land, and everyone would like to take the good land. How is one to do in order to get it justly divided? In this way, he that will use the good land must pay those who have got no land the value of the land he uses," Nekhludoff went on, answering his own question. "As it would be difficult to say who should pay whom, and money is needed for communal use, it should be arranged that he who uses the good land should pay the amount of the value of his land to the commune for its needs. Then everyone would share equally. If you want to use land, pay for it. More for the good, less for the bad land. If you do not wish to use land, don't pay anything, and those who use the land will pay the taxes and the communal expenses for you." "Well, he had a head, this George," said the oven builder, moving his brows. "He who has good land must pay more." "If only the payment is according to our strength," said the tall man with the bass voice, evidently foreseeing how the matter would end. "The payment should not be too high and not too low. If it is too high, it will not get paid, and there will be a loss. And if it's too low, it will be bought and sold. There would be a trading in land. This is what I wish to arrange among you here." "That is just, that is right. Yes, that would do," said the peasants. "He has a head, this George," said the broad-shouldered old man with the curls. "See what he has invented." "Well, then, how would it be if I wished to take some land?" asked the smiling foreman. "If there's an allotment to spare, take it and work it," said Nekhludoff. "What do you want it for? You have sufficient as it is," said the old man with the laughing eyes. With this the conference ended. Nekhludoff repeated his offer and advised the men to talk it over with the rest of the commune and to return with the answer. The peasants said they would talk it over and bring an answer, and left in a state of excitement. Their loud talk was audible as they went along the road, and up to late in the night the sound of voices came along the river from the village. The next day the peasants did not go to work, but spent it in considering the landlord's offer. The commune was divided into two parties, one which regarded the offer as a profitable one to themselves and saw no danger in agreeing with it, and another which suspected and feared the offer it did not understand. On the third day, however, all agreed, and some were sent to Nekhludoff to accept his offer. They were influenced in their decision by the explanation some of the old men gave of the landlord's conduct, which did away with all fear of deceit. They thought the gentleman had begun to consider his soul, and was acting, as he did, for its salvation. The alms which Nekhludoff had given away while in Panovo made his explanation seem likely. The fact that Nekhludoff had never before been face to face with such great poverty and so bare a life as the peasants had come to in this place, and was so appalled by it, made him give away money in charity, though he knew that this was not reasonable. He could not help giving the money, of which he now had a great deal, having received a large sum for the forest he had sold the year before, and also the hand money for the implements and stock in Kousminski. As soon as it was known that the master was giving money in charity, crowds of people, chiefly women, began to come to ask him for help. He did not in the least know how to deal with them, how to decide how much and whom to give it to. He felt that to refuse to give money, of which he had a great deal, to poor people was impossible, yet to give casually to those who asked was not wise. The last day he spent in Panovo, Nekhludoff looked over the things left in his aunt's house, and in the bottom drawer of the mahogany wardrobe, with the brass lions' heads with rings through them, he found many letters, and amongst them a photograph of a group consisting of his aunts Sophia Ivanovna and Mary Ivanovna, a student, and Katusha. Of all the things in the house he took only the letters and the photograph. The rest he left to the miller, who, at the smiling foreman's recommendation, had bought the house and all it contained, to be taken down and carried away at 1/10 of the real value. Recalling the feeling of regret at the loss of his property which he had felt in Kousminski, Nekhludoff was surprised how he could have felt this regret. Now he felt nothing but unceasing joy at the deliverance, and a sensation of newness, something like that which a traveller must experience when discovering new countries. End of Book 2, Chapter 9. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 10. Nekhludoff returns to town. The town struck Nekhludoff in a new and peculiar light on his return. He came back in the evening when the gas was lit, and drove from the railway station to his house, where the rooms still smelt of naphthalene. Agrafena Petrovna and Korney were both feeling tired and dissatisfied, and had even had a quarrel over those things that seemed made only to be aired and packed away. Nekhludoff's room was empty, but not in order, and the way to it was blocked up with boxes, so that his arrival evidently hindered the business which, owing to a curious kind of inertia, was going on in this house. The evident folly of these proceedings, in which he had once taken part, was so distasteful to Nekhludoff after the impressions the misery of the life of the peasants had made on him, that he decided to go to a hotel the next day, leaving Agrafena Petrovna to put away the things as she thought fit until his sister should come and finally dispose of everything in the house. Nekhludoff left home early and chose a couple of rooms in a very modest and not particularly clean lodging-house within easy reach of the prison, and, having given orders that some of his things should be sent there, he went to see the advocate. It was cold out of doors. After some rainy and stormy weather it had turned out cold, as it often does in spring. It was so cold that Nekhludoff felt quite chilly in his light overcoat, and walked fast, hoping to get warmer. His mind was filled with thoughts of the peasants, the women, children, old men, and all the poverty and weariness which he seemed to have seen for the first time, especially the smiling, old-faced infant writhing with his calfless little legs, and he could not help contrasting what was going on in the town. Passing by the butchers', fishmongers', and clothiers' shops, he was struck, as if he saw them for the first time, by the appearance of the clean, well-fed shopkeepers, like whom you could not find one peasant in the country. These men were apparently convinced that the pains they took to deceive the people who did not know much about their goods was not a useless, but rather an important business. The coachmen with their broad hips and rows of buttons down their sides, and the doorkeepers with gold cords on their caps, the servant girls with their aprons and curly fringes, and especially the smart izvozchiks, with the nape of their necks clean shaved, as they sat lolling back in their traps and examined the passers-by with dissolute and contemptuous air, looked well fed. In all these people Nekhludoff could not now help seeing some of these very peasants who had been driven into the town by lack of land. Some of the peasants driven to the town had found means of profiting by the conditions of town life, and had become like the gentlefolk, and were pleased with their position. Others were in a worse position than they had been in the country, and were more to be pitied than the country people. Such seemed the bootmakers Nekhludoff saw in the cellar, the pale dishevelled washerwomen with their thin bare arms ironing at an open window, out of which streamed soapy steam. Such the two house painters with their aprons, stockingless feet, all bespattered and smeared with paint, whom Nekhludoff met. their weak brown arms bared to above the elbows, carrying a pail full of paint, and quarrelling with each other. Their faces looked haggard and cross. The dark faces of the carters jolting along in their carts bore the same expression, and so did the faces of the tattered men and women who stood begging at the street corners. The same kind of faces were to be seen at the open windows of the eating-houses which Nekhludoff passed. By the dirty tables on which stood tea-things and bottles, and between which waiters dressed in white shirts were rushing hither and thither, sat shouting and singing red perspiring men with stupefied faces. One sat by the window with lifted brows and pouting lips and fixed eyes, as if trying to remember something. "And why are they all gathered here?" Nekhludoff thought, breathing in, together with the dust which the cold wind blew towards him, the air filled with the smell of rank oil and fresh paint. In one street he met a row of carts loaded with something made of iron that rattled so on the uneven pavement that it made his ears and head ache. He started walking still faster in order to pass the row of carts, when he heard himself called by name. He stopped and saw an officer with sharp pointed moustaches and shining face, who sat in the trap of a swell isvostchik and waved his hand in a friendly manner, his smile disclosing unusually long white teeth. "Nekhludoff, can it be you?" Nekhludoff's first feeling was one of pleasure. "Ah, Schonbock!" he exclaimed joyfully. But he knew the next moment that there was nothing to be joyful about. This was that Schonbock who had been in the house of Nekhludoff's aunts that day, and whom Nekhludoff had quite lost out of sight, but about whom he had heard that in spite of his debts he had somehow managed to remain in the cavalry, and by some means or other still kept his place among the rich. His gay, contented appearance corroborated this report. "What a good thing that I have caught you! There is no one in town. Ah, old fellow, you have grown old," he said, getting out of the trap and moving his shoulders about. "I only knew you by your walk. Look here, we must dine together. Is there any place where they feed one decently?" "I don't think I can spare the time," Nekhludoff answered, thinking only of how he could best get rid of his companion without hurting him. "And what has brought you here?" he asked. "Business, old fellow. Guardianship business. I am a guardian now. I am managing Samonov's affairs, the millionaire, you know. He has softening of the brain. And he's got 54,000 desatins of land," he said, with peculiar pride, as if he himself made all these desatins. "The affairs were terribly neglected. All the land was let to the peasants. They did not pay anything. There were more than 80,000 roubles debt. I changed it all in 1 year, and have got 70% more out of it. What do you think of that?" he asked proudly. Nekhludoff remembered having heard that this Schonbock, just because he had spent all he had attained by some special influence the post of guardian to a rich old man who was squandering his property, and was now evidently living by this guardianship. "How am I to get rid of him without offending him?" thought Nekhludoff, looking at his full, shiny face with the stiffened moustache, and listening to his friendly, good-humoured chatter about where one gets fed best, and his bragging about his doings as a guardian. "Well, then, where do we dine?" "Really, I have no time to spare," said Nekhludoff, glancing at his watch. "Then, look here, tonight at the races. Will you be there?" "No, I shall not be there." "Do come. I have none of my own now, but I back Grisha's horses. You remember, he has a fine stud. You'll come, won't you? And we'll have some supper together." "No, I cannot have supper with you either," said Nekhludoff with a smile. "Well, that's too bad. And where are you off to now? Shall I give you a lift?" "I am going to see an advocate, close to here, round the corner." "Oh, yes, of course. You have got something to do with the prisons, have turned into a prisoners' mediator, I hear," said Schonbock, laughing. "The Korchagins told me. They have left town already. What does it all mean? Tell me." Yes, yes, it is quite true, Nekhludoff answered, but I cannot tell you about it in the street. Of course. You were always a crank, but you will come to the races? No, I neither can nor wish to come. Please do not be angry with me. Angry? Dear me, no. Where do you live? And suddenly his face became serious, his eyes fixed, and he drew up his brows. He seemed to be trying to remember something, and Nekhludoff noticed the same dull expression as that of the man with the raised brows and pouting lips whom he had seen at the window of the eating-house. "How cold it is it not?" "Have you got the parcels?" said Schonbock, turning to the izvozchik. "All right, good-bye. I am very glad indeed to have met you," and warmly pressing Nekhludoff's hand, he jumped into the trap and waved his white-gloved hand in front of his shiny face, with his usual smile showing his exceptionally white teeth. "Can I have also been like that?" Nekhludoff thought, as he continued his way to the advocate's. "Yes, I wished to be like that, though I was not quite like it, and I thought of living my life in that way." End of chapter 10. By Leo Tolstoy, translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 11. An advocate's views on judges and prosecutors. Nekhludoff was admitted by the advocate before his turn. The advocate at once commenced to talk about the Menshovs case, which he had read with indignation at the inconsistency of the accusation. "This case is perfectly revolting," he said. "It is very likely that the owner himself set fire to the building in order to get the insurance money. And the chief thing is that there is no evidence to prove the Menshovs' guilt. There are no proofs whatever. It is all owing to the special zeal of the examining magistrate and the carelessness of the prosecutor. If they are tried here and not in a provincial court, I guarantee that they will be acquitted, and I shall charge nothing. Now then, the next case, that of Theodosia Birukov. The appeal to the Emperor is written. If you go to Petersburg, you'd better take it with you and hand it in yourself, with a request of your own, or else they will only make a few inquiries, and nothing will come of it. You must try and get at some of the influential members of the appeal committee." "Well, is this all?" "No, here I have a letter. I see you have turned into a pipe, a spout through which all the complaints of the prison are poured," said the advocate with a smile. "It is too much. You'll not be able to manage it." "No, but this is a striking case," said Nekhludoff, and gave a brief outline of the case of a peasant who began to read the Gospels to the peasants in the village and to discuss them with his friends. The priest regarded this as a crime and informed the authorities. The magistrate examined him, and the public prosecutor drew up an act of indictment, and the law courts committed him for trial. "This is really too terrible," Nekhludoff said. "Can it be true?" "What are you surprised at?" "Why, everything. I can understand the police officer who simply obeys orders, but the prosecutor drawing up an act of that kind, an educated man." "That is where the mistake lies, that we are in the habit of considering that the prosecutors and the judges in general are some kind of liberal persons. There was a time when they were such, but now it is quite different. They are just officials, only troubled about payday. They receive their salaries and want them increased, and there their principles end. They will accuse, judge, and sentence any one you like." "Yes, but do laws really exist that can condemn a man to Siberia for reading the Bible with his friends?" "Not only to be exiled to the less remote parts of Siberia, but even to the mines, if you can only prove that reading the Bible they took the liberty of explaining it to others, not according to orders, and in this way condemned the explanations given by the Church. blaming the Greek Orthodox religion in the presence of the common people means, according to statute, the mines. Impossible!" "I assure you it is so. I always tell these gentlemen, the judges," the advocate continued, "that I cannot look at them without gratitude, because if I am not in prison, and you, and all of us, it is only owing to their kindness. To deprive us of our privileges, and send us all to the less remote parts of Siberia, would be an easy thing for them." "Well, if it is so, and if everything depends on the Procureur and others who can, at will, either enforce the laws or not, what are the trials for?" The advocate burst into a merry laugh. "You do put strange questions. My dear sir, that is philosophy. Well, we might have a talk about that too. Could you come on Saturday? You will meet men of science, literary men, and artists at my house, and then we might discuss these general questions," said the advocate, pronouncing the words "general questions" with ironical pathos. "You have met my wife? Do come." "Thank you, I will try to," said Nekhludoff, and felt that he was saying an untruth, and knew that if he tried to do anything it would be to keep away from the advocate's literary evening and the circle of the men of science, art, and literature. The laugh with which the advocate met Nekhludoff's remark that trials could have no meaning if the judges might enforce the laws or not, according to their notion, and the tone with which he pronounced the words philosophy and general questions, proved to Nekhludoff how very differently he and the advocate, and probably the advocate's friends, looked at things. And he felt that in spite of the distance that now existed between himself and his former companions, Schonbock, etc., the difference between himself and the circle of the advocate and his friends was still greater. End of chapter 11.
Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 12. Why the Peasants Flocked to Town. The prison was a long way off, and it was getting late, so Nekhludoff took an izvostchik. The izvostchik, a middle-aged man with an intelligent and kind face, turned round towards Nekhludoff as they were driving along one of the streets, and pointed to a huge house that was being built there. "Just see what a tremendous house they have begun to build," he said, as if he was partly responsible for the building of the house and proud of it. The house was really immense, and was being built in a very original style. The strong pine beams of the scaffolding were firmly fixed together with iron bands, and a plank wall separated the building from the street. On the boards of the scaffolding workmen, all bespattered with plaster, moved hither and thither like ants. Some were laying bricks, some hewing stones, some carrying up the heavy hods and pails and bringing them down empty. A fat and finely dressed gentleman, probably the architect, stood by the scaffolding, pointing upward and explaining something to a contractor. A peasant from the Vladimir government, who was respectfully listening to him. Empty carts were coming out of the gate by which the architect and the contractor were standing, and loaded ones were going in. And how sure they all are, those that do the work as well as those who make them do it, that it ought to be, that while their wives at home, who are with child, are labouring beyond their strength, and their children with the patchwork caps, doomed soon to the cold grave, smile with suffering and contort their little legs, they must be building this stupid and useless palace for some stupid and useless person, one of those who spoil and rob them, Nekhludoff thought, while looking at the house. "Yes, it is a stupid house," he said, uttering his thought out aloud. "Why stupid?" replied the izvostchik in an offended tone. Thanks to it, the people get work. It's not stupid. But the work is useless. It can't be useless, or why should it be done, said the izvostchik. The people get bread by it. Nekhlyudov was silent, and it would have been difficult to talk, because of the clatter the wheels made. When they came nearer the prison, and the izvostchik turned off the paved onto the macadamized road, it became easier to talk, and he again turned to Nekhlyudov. And what a lot of these people are flocking to the town nowadays. It's awful, he said, turning round on the box and pointing to a party of peasant workmen who were coming towards them, carrying saws, axes, sheepskins, coats, and bags strapped to their shoulders. More than in other years? Nekhlyudov asked. By far. This year every place is crowded, so that it's just terrible. The employers just fling the workmen about like chaff. Not a job to be got. Why is that? They've increased. There's no room for them. Well, what if they have increased? Why do not they stay in the village? There's nothing for them to do in the village. No land to be had. Nekhlyudov felt as one does when touching a sore place. It feels as if the bruised part were always being hit. Yet it is only because the place is sore that the touch is felt. Is it possible that the same thing is happening everywhere, he thought, and began questioning the izvostchik about the quantity of land in his village, how much land the man himself had, and why he had left the country. We have a desiatin per man, sir, he said. Our family have 3 men's shares of the land. My father and a brother at home, and manage the land, and another brother is serving in the army. But there's nothing to manage. My brother has had thoughts of coming to Moscow too. And cannot land be rented? How's one to rent it nowadays? The gentry, such as they were, have squandered all theirs. Men of business have got it all into their own hands. One can't rent it from them. They farm it themselves. We have a Frenchman ruling in our place. He bought the estate from our former landlord and won't let it. And there's an end of it. Who's that Frenchman? Dufour is the Frenchman's name. Perhaps you've heard of him. He makes wigs for the actors in the big theatre. It is a good business, so he's prospering. He bought it from our lady, the whole of the estate, and now he has us in his power. He just rides on us as he pleases. The Lord be thanked, he is a good man himself, only his wife, a Russian, is such a brute that, God have mercy on us. She robs the people. It's awful. Well, here's the prison. Am I to drive you to the entrance? I'm afraid they'll not let us do it, though. End of chapter 12. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 13. Nurse Maslova. When he rang the bell at the front entrance, Nekhlyudov's heart stood still with horror as he thought of the state he might find Maslova in today, and at the mystery that he felt to be in her, and in the people that were collected in the prison. He asked the jailer who opened the door for Maslova. After making the necessary inquiry, the jailer informed him that she was in the hospital. Nekhlyudov went there. A kindly old man, the hospital doorkeeper, let him in at once, and, after asking Nekhlyudov whom he wanted, directed him to the children's ward. A young doctor, saturated with carbolic acid, met Nekhlyudov in the passage, and asked him severely what he wanted. This doctor was always making all sorts of concessions to the prisoners, and was therefore continually coming into conflict with the prison authorities, and even with the head doctor. Fearing lest Nekhlyudov should demand something unlawful, and wishing to show that he made no exceptions for any one, he pretended to be cross. "There are no women here. It is the children's ward," he said. "Yes, I know. but a prisoner has been removed here to be an assistant nurse." "Yes, there are two such here. Then whom do you want?" "I am closely connected with one of them, named Maslova," Nekhlyudov answered, "and should like to speak to her. I am going to Petersburg to hand in an appeal to the Senate about her case, and should like to give her this. It is only a photo," Nekhlyudov said, taking an envelope out of his pocket. "All right, you may do that," said the doctor, relenting, and turning to an old woman with a white apron, he told her to call the prisoner, Nurse Maslova. "Will you take a seat or go into the waiting room?" "Thanks," said Nekhlyudov, and profiting by the favourable change in the manner of the doctor towards him, asked how they were satisfied with Maslova in the hospital. "Oh, she is all right. She works fairly well, if you take the conditions of her former life into account. But here she is." The old nurse came in at one of the doors, followed by Maslova, who wore a blue striped dress, a white apron, a kerchief that quite covered her hair. When she saw Nekhlyudov her face flushed, and she stopped as if hesitating, then frowned, and with downcast eyes went quickly towards him along the strip of carpet in the middle of the passage. When she came up to Nekhlyudov she did not wish to give him her hand, and then gave it, growing redder still. Nekhlyudov had not seen her since the day when she begged forgiveness for having been in a passion, and he expected to find her the same as she was then. But today she was quite different. There was something new in the expression of her face, reserve and shyness, and, as it seemed to him, animosity towards him. He told her what he had already said to the doctor, i.e. that he was going to Petersburg, and he handed her the envelope with a photograph which he had brought from Panovo. "I found this in Panovo. It's an old photograph. Perhaps you would like it. Take it." Lifting her dark eyebrows, she looked at him with surprise in her squinting eyes, as if asking, "What is this for?" took the photo silently, and put it in the bib of her apron. "I saw your aunt there," said Nekhlyudov. "Did you?" she said indifferently. "Are you all right here?" Nekhlyudov asked. "Oh yes, it's all right," she said. "Not too difficult?" "Oh no, but I am not used to it yet." "I am glad, for your sake. Anyhow, it is better than there." "Than where? There?" she asked, her face flushing again. "There, in the prison," Nekhlyudov hurriedly answered. "Why better?" she asked. "I think the people are better. Here are none such as there must be there." "There are many good ones there," she said. "I have been seeing about the Menshoffs, and hope they will be liberated," said Nekhlyudov. "God grant they may. Such a splendid old woman," she said, again repeating her opinion of the old woman, and slightly smiling. "I am going to Petersburg to-day. Your case will come on soon, and I hope the sentence will be repealed." "Whether it is repealed or not won't matter now," she said. "Why not now?" "So," she said, looking with a quick, questioning glance into his eyes. Nekhlyudov understood the word and the look to mean that she wished to know whether he still kept firm to his decision or had accepted her refusal. "I do not know why it does not matter to you," he said. "It certainly does not matter, as far as I am concerned, whether you are acquitted or not. I am ready to do what I told you in any case," he said decidedly. She lifted her head, and her black squinting eyes remained fixed on him and beyond him, and her face beamed with joy. But the words she spoke were very different from what her eyes said. "You should not speak like that," she said. "I am saying it so that you should know." "Everything has been said about that, and there is no use speaking," she said, with difficulty repressing a smile. A sudden noise came from the hospital ward, and the sound of a child crying. "I think they are calling me," she said, and looked around uneasily. "Well, good-bye, then," he said. She pretended not to see his extended hand, and without taking it, turned away and hastily walked along the strip of carpet, trying to hide the triumph she felt. What is going on in her? What is she thinking? What does she feel? Does she mean to prove me, or can she really not forgive me? Is it that she cannot, or that she will not, express what she feels and thinks? Has she softened or hardened, he asked himself, and could find no answer. He only knew that she had altered, and that an important change was going on in her soul, and this change united him not only to her, but also to him for whose sake that change was being wrought. And this union brought on a state of joyful animation and tenderness. When she returned to the ward, in which there stood 8 small beds, Maslova began, in obedience to the nurse's order, to arrange one of the beds, and bending over too far with the sheet, she slipped and nearly fell down. A little convalescent boy with a bandaged neck, who was looking at her, laughed. Maslova could no longer contain herself, and burst into loud laughter, and such contagious laughter that several of the children also burst out laughing, and one of the sisters rebuked her angrily. "What are you giggling at? Do you think you are where you used to be? Go and fetch the food." Maslova obeyed, and went where she was sent, but, catching the eye of the bandaged boy, who was not allowed to laugh, she again burst out laughing. Whenever she was alone, Maslova again and again pulled the photograph partly out of the envelope and looked at it admiringly. But only in the evening, when she was off duty and alone in the bedroom which she shared with a nurse, did she take it quite out of the envelope and gaze long at the faded yellow photograph, caressing with her eyes every detail of faces and clothing, the steps of the veranda, and the bushes which served as a background to his and hers and her aunt's faces, and could not cease from admiring especially herself. Her pretty young face, with the curly hair round the forehead. She was so absorbed that she did not hear her fellow nurse come into the room. "What is it that he's given you?" said the good-natured fat nurse, stooping over the photograph. "Who's this? You?" "Who else?" said Maslova, looking into her companion's face with a smile. "And who's this?" "Himself." "And is this his mother?" "No, his aunt. Would you not have known me?" "Never. The whole face is altered." "Why, it must be 10 years since then." "Not years, but a lifetime," said Maslova, and suddenly her animation went, her face grew gloomy, and a deep line appeared between her brows. "Why so? Your way of life must have been an easy one." "Easy indeed," Maslova reiterated, closing her eyes and shaking her head. "It is hell." "Why, what makes it so?" "What makes it so? From 8 till 4 in the morning, and every night the same." "Then why don't they give it up?" "They can't give it up if they want to." "But what's the use of talking?" Maslova said, jumping up and throwing the photograph into the drawer of the table, and with difficulty repressing angry tears, she ran out into the passage and slammed the door. While looking at the group, she imagined herself such as she was there, and dreamt of her happiness then, and of the possibility of happiness with him now. But her companion's words reminded her of what she was now and what she had been, and brought back all the horrors of that life which she had felt but dimly, and not allowed herself to realize. It was only now that the memory of all those terrible nights came vividly back to her, especially one during the carnival, when she was expecting a student who had promised to buy her out. She remembered how she, wearing her low-necked silk dress stained with wine, a red bow in her untidy hair, wearied, weak, half tipsy, having seen her visitors off, sat down, during an interval in the dancing, by the piano beside the bonny pianiste with the blotchy face, who played the accompaniments to the violin, and began complaining of her hard fate, and how this pianiste said that she too was feeling how heavy her position was, and would like to change it, and how Clara suddenly came up to them, and how they all three decided to change their life. They thought that the night was over, and were about to go away, when suddenly the noise of tipsy voices was heard in the anteroom. The violinist played a tune, and the pianiste began hammering the first figure of a quadrille on the piano, to the tune of a most merry Russian song. A small perspiring man, smelling of spirits, with a white tie and swallow-tail coat, which he took off after the first figure, came up to her, hiccuping, and caught her up, while another fat man with a beard, and also wearing a dress coat (they had come straight from ball), caught Clara up, and for a long time they turned, danced, screamed, drank. And so it went on for another year, and another, and a third. How could she help changing? And he was the cause of it all. And, suddenly, all her former bitterness against him reawoke. She wished to scold, to reproach him. She regretted having neglected the opportunity of repeating to him once more that she knew him, and would not give in to him, would not let him make use of her spiritually as he had done physically. And she longed for drink in order to stifle the feeling of pity to herself and the useless feeling of reproach to him. And she would have broken her word if she had been inside the prison. Here she could not get any spirits except by applying to the medical assistant, and she was afraid of him, because he made up to her, and intimate relations with men were disgusting to her now. After sitting a while on a form in the passage, she returned to her little room, and without paying any heed to her companion's words, she wept for a long time over her wrecked life. End of chapter 13. Medway, Massachusetts. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 14. An Aristocratic Circle. Nekhlyudov had 4 matters to attend to in Petersburg. The first was the appeal to the Senate in Maslova's case, the second to hand in Theodosia Birukov's petition to the committee, the third to comply with Vera Doukova's requests, i.e. to get her friend Shustova released from prison, and get permission for a mother to visit her son in prison. Vera Doukova had written to him about this, and he was going to the gendarmerie office to attend to these 2 matters, which he counted as one. The fourth matter he meant to attend to was the case of some sectarians who had been separated from their families and exiled to the Caucasus because they read and discussed the Gospels. It was not so much to them as to himself. He had promised to do all he could to clear up this affair. Since his last visit to Maslenikov, and especially since he had been in the country, Nekhlyudov had not exactly formed a resolution, but felt with his whole nature a loathing for that society in which he had lived till then, that society which so carefully hides the sufferings of millions in order to assure ease and pleasure to a small number of people, that the people belonging to this society do not and cannot see these sufferings, nor the cruelty and wickedness of their life. Nekhlyudov could no longer move in this society without feeling ill at ease and reproaching himself. And yet all the ties of relationship and friendship, and his own habits, were drawing him back into this society. Besides, that which alone interested him now, his desire to help Maslova and the other sufferers, made it necessary to ask for help and service from persons belonging to that society, persons whom he not only could not respect, but who often aroused in him indignation and a feeling of contempt. When he came to Petersburg and stopped at his aunt's, his mother's sister, the Countess Tarsky, wife of a former minister, Nekhlyudov at once found himself in the very midst of that aristocratic circle which had grown so foreign to him. This was very unpleasant, but there was no possibility of getting out of it. To put up at a hotel instead of at his aunt's house would have been to offend his aunt, and besides, his aunt had important connections, and might be extremely useful in all these matters he meant to attend to. "What is this I hear about you? All sorts of marvels," said the Countess Katerina Ivanovna Tcharsky, as she gave him his coffee immediately after his arrival. "Vous posez pour un Howard. Helping criminals, going the round of prisons, setting things right." "Oh no, I never thought of it." "Why not? It is a good thing, only there seems to be some romantic story connected with it. Let us hear all about it." Nekhlyudov told her the whole truth about his relations to Maslova. "Yes, yes, I remember your poor mother telling me about it. That was when you were staying with those old women. I believe they wished to marry you to their ward." The Countess Katerina Ivanovna had always despised Nekhlyudov's aunts on his father's side. "So it's she. Elle est encore jolie?" Katerina Ivanovna was a strong, bright, energetic, talkative woman of 60. She was tall and very stout, and had a decidedly black moustache on her lip. Nekhlyudov was fond of her, and had, even as a child, been infected by her energy and mirth. "No, ma tante, that's at an end. I only wish to help her, because she is innocently accused. I am the cause of it, and the cause of her fate being what it is, I feel it my duty to do all I can for her." "What is this I have heard about your intention of marrying her?" "Yes, it was my intention, but she does not wish it." Katerina Ivanovna looked at her nephew with raised brows and drooping eyeballs, in silent amazement. Suddenly her face changed, and with a look of pleasure she said, "Well, she is wiser than you. Dear me, you are a fool. And you would have married her?" "Most certainly." "After her having been what she was?" "All the more, since I was the cause of it." "Well, you are a simpleton," said his aunt, repressing a smile. "A terrible simpleton, but it is just because you are such a terrible simpleton that I love you." She repeated the word, evidently liking it, as it seemed to correctly convey to her mind the idea of her nephew's moral state. "Do you know, what a lucky chance. Aline has a wonderful home, the Magdalena home. I went there once. They are terribly disgusting. After that I had to pray continually. But Aline is devoted to it, body and soul. So we shall place her there, yours, I mean." "But she is condemned to Siberia. I have come on purpose to appeal about it. This is one of my requests to you." "Dear me, and where do you appeal to in this case?" "To the Senate." "Ah, the Senate. Yes, my dear cousin Leo is in the Senate, but he is in the heraldry department, and I don't know any of the real ones. They are all some kind of Germans. Gay, fay, day, tout l'alphabet, or else all kinds of Ivanovs, Simonovs, Nikitins, or else Ivanenkos, Simonenkos, Nikitenkos, pour varier. Les gens de l'autre monde." "Well, it is all the same. I'll tell my husband. He knows them. He knows all sorts of people. I'll tell him, but you will have to explain. He never understands me. Whatever I may say, he always maintains he does not understand it. C'est un parti pris. Every one understands, but only not he." At this moment a footman with stocking legs came in with a note on a silver platter. "There now, from Aline herself. You will have a chance of hearing Kiesewetter." "Who is Kiesewetter?" "Kiesewetter? Come this evening, and you will find out who he is. He speaks in such a way that the most hardened criminals sink on their knees and weep and repent." The Countess Katerina Ivanovna, however strange it may seem, and however little it seemed in keeping with the rest of her character, was a staunch adherent of that teaching which holds that the essence of Christianity lies in the belief in redemption. She went to meetings where this teaching, then in fashion, was being preached, and assembled the faithful in her own house. Though this teaching repudiated all ceremonies, icons, and sacraments, Katerina Ivanovna had icons in every room, and one on the wall above her bed, and she kept all that the Church prescribed, without noticing any contradiction in that. There now, if your Magdalena could hear him, she would be converted, said the Countess. Do stay at home tonight. You will hear him. He is a wonderful man. It does not interest me, ma tante. But I tell you that it is interesting, and you must come home. Now you may go. What else do you want of me? Videz votre sac. The next is in the fortress. In the fortress? I can give you a note for that to the Baron Kriegsmuth. C'est un très brave homme. Oh, but you know him. He was a comrade of your father's. Il donne dans la spiritisme. But that does not matter. He is a good fellow. What do you want there? I want to get leave for a mother to visit her son, who is in prison there. But I was told that this did not depend on Kriegsmuth, but on Tcherviansky. I do not like Tcherviansky, but he is Mariette's husband. We might ask her. She will do it for me. Elle est très gentille. I have also to petition for a woman who is in prison there without knowing what for. No fear, she knows well enough. They all know it very well, and it serves them right, those short-haired. Many advanced women wear their hair short like men, ones. We do not know whether it serves them right or not, but they suffer. You are a Christian and believe in the gospel teaching, and yet you are so pitiless. That has nothing to do with it. The Gospels are the Gospels, but what is disgusting remains disgusting. It would be worse if I pretended to love nihilists, especially short-haired women. Nihilists, when I cannot bear them. Why can you not bear them? You ask why after the 1st of March. The Emperor Alexander II was killed on the 1st of March, old style. They did not all take part in it on the 1st of March. Never mind. They should not meddle with what is no business of theirs. It's not women's business. But you consider that Mariette may take part in business? Mariette? Mariette is Mariette, and these are goodness knows what. Want to teach everybody? Not to teach, but simply to help the people. One knows whom to help and whom not to help without them. But the peasants are in great need. I have just returned from the country. Is it necessary that the peasants should work to the very limits of their strength and never have sufficient to eat, while we are living in the greatest luxury? Said Nekhlyudov, involuntarily led on by his aunt's good nature into telling her what was in his thoughts. What do you want then? That I should work and not eat anything? No, I do not wish you not to eat. I only wish that we should all work and all eat. He could not help smiling as he said it. Again raising her brow and drooping her eyeballs, his aunt looked at him curiously. Mon cher, vous finirez mal, she said. Just then the general and former minister, Countess Charsky's husband, a tall, broad-shouldered man, came into the room. Ah, Dmitri, how d'ye do? He said, turning his freshly shaved cheek to Nekhlyudov to be kissed. When did you get here? And he silently kissed his wife on the forehead. Non, il est impayable, the Countess said, turning to her husband. He wants me to go and wash clothes and live on potatoes. He is an awful fool, but all the same, do what he is going to ask of you. A terrible simpleton, she added. Have you heard? Kamenskaya is in such despair that they fear for her life, she said to her husband. You should go and call there. Yes, it is dreadful, said her husband. Go along then and talk to him. I must write some letters. Hardly had Nekhlyudov stepped into the room, next to the drawing-room. Then she called him back. "Shall I write to Mariette, then?" "Please, ma tante. I shall leave a blank for what you want to say about the short-haired one, and she will give her husband his orders, and he'll do it. Do not think me wicked. They are all so disgusting, your prologues. But je ne leur veux pas de mal. Bother them. Well, go, but be sure to stay at home this evening to hear Kiesewetter, and we shall have some prayers. And if only you do not resist, cela vous ferait beaucoup de bien. I know your poor mother, and all of you were always very backward in these things." End of Book 2, Chapter 14. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 15. An Average Statesman. Count Ivan Mikhailovich had been a minister and was a man of strong convictions. The convictions of Count Ivan Mikhailovich consisted in the belief that, just as it was natural for a bird to feed on worms, to be clothed in feathers and down, and to fly in the air, so it was natural to him to feed on the choicest and most expensive food, prepared by highly paid cooks, to wear the most comfortable and most expensive clothing, to drive with the best and fastest horses, and that therefore all these things should be ready found for him. Besides this, Count Ivan Mikhailovich considered that the more money he could get out of the treasury by all sorts of means, the more orders he had, including different diamond insignia of something or other, and the oftener he spoke to highly placed individuals of both sexes, so much the better it was. All the rest Count Ivan Mikhailovich considered insignificant and uninteresting beside these dogmas. All the rest might be as it was, or just the reverse. Count Ivan Mikhailovich lived and acted according to these lights for 40 years, and at the end of 40 years reached the position of a Minister of State. The chief qualities that enabled Count Ivan Mikhailovich to reach this position were his capacity of understanding the meaning of documents and laws, and of drawing up, though clumsily, intelligible state papers, and of spelling them correctly. Secondly, his very stately appearance, which enabled him, when necessary, to seem not only extremely proud, but unapproachable and majestic, while at other times he could be abjectly and almost passionately servile. Thirdly, the absence of any general principles or rules, either of personal or administrative morality, which made it possible for him either to agree or disagree with anybody according to what was wanted at the time. When acting thus, his only endeavour was to sustain the appearance of good breeding, and not to seem too plainly inconsistent. As for his actions being moral or not in themselves, or whether they were going to result in the highest welfare or greatest evil for the whole of the Russian Empire, or even the entire world, that was quite indifferent to him. When he became minister, not only those dependent on him, and there were a great many of them, and people connected with him, but many strangers, and even he himself, were convinced that he was a very clever statesman. But after some time had elapsed, and he had done nothing, and had nothing to show, and when, in accordance with the law of the struggle for existence, others, like himself, who had learnt to write and understand documents, stately and unprincipled officials, had displaced him, he turned out to be not only far from clever, but very limited and badly educated. Though self-assured, his views hardly reaching the level of those in the leading articles of the Conservative papers, it became apparent that there was nothing in him to distinguish him from those other badly educated and self-assured officials who had pushed him out, and he himself saw it. But this did not shake his conviction that he had to receive a great deal of money out of the treasury every year, and new decorations for his dress clothes. This conviction was so firm that no one had the pluck to refuse these things to him, and he received yearly, partly in form of a pension, partly as a salary for being a member in a government institution and chairman of all sorts of committees and councils, several tens of thousands of roubles, besides the right, highly prized by him, of sewing all sorts of new cords to his shoulders and trousers, and ribbons to wear under and enamel stars to fix on to his dress coat. In consequence of this, Count Ivan Mikhailovitch had very high connections. Count Ivan Mikhailovitch listened to Nekhlyudov as he was wont to listen to the reports of the permanent secretary of his department, and, having heard him, said he would give him 2 notes, one to the Senator Wolf of the Appeal Department. All sorts of things are reported of him, but dans tous les cas c'est un homme très comme il faut, he said. He is indebted to me, and will do all that is possible. The other note Count Ivan Mikhailovitch gave Nekhlyudov was to an influential member of the Petition Committee. The story of Theodosia Birukov, as told by Nekhlyudov, interested him very much. When Nekhlyudov said that he thought of writing to the Empress, the Count replied that it certainly was a very touching story, and might, if occasion presented itself, he told her. But he could not promise. Let the petition be handed in due form. Should there be an opportunity, and if a petit comite was called on Thursday, he thought he would tell her the story. As soon as Nekhlyudov had received these 2 notes, and a note to Mariette from his aunt, he at once set off to these different places. First he went to Mariette's. He had known her as a half-grown girl, the daughter of an aristocratic but not wealthy family, and had heard how she had married a man who was making a career, whom Nekhlyudov had heard badly spoken of, and, as usual, he felt it hard to ask a favour of a man he did not esteem. In these cases he always felt an inner dissension and dissatisfaction, and wavered whether to ask the favour or not, and always resolved to ask. Besides feeling himself in a false position among those to whose set he no longer regarded himself as belonging, who yet regarded him as belonging to them, he felt himself getting into the old accustomed rut, and in spite of himself fell into the thoughtless and immoral tone that reigned in that circle. He felt that, from the first with his aunt, he involuntarily fell into a bantering tone while talking about serious matters. Petersburg in general affected him with its usual physically invigorating and mentally dulling effect. Everything so clean, so comfortably well arranged, and the people so lenient in moral matters, that life seemed very easy. A fine, clean, and polite izvozchik drove him past fine, clean, polite policemen, along the fine, clean, watered streets, past fine, clean houses, to the house in which Mariette lived. At the front door stood a pair of English horses, with English harness, and an English-looking coachman on the box, with the lower part of his face shaved, proudly holding a whip. The doorkeeper, dressed in a wonderfully clean livery, opened the door into the hall, where in still cleaner livery, with gold cords, stood the footman, with his splendid whiskers well combed out, and the orderly on duty in a brand new uniform. The general does not receive, and the generaless does not receive either. She is just going to drive out. Nekhlyudov took out Katerina Ivanovna's letter, and going up to a table on which lay a visitor's book, began to write that he was sorry not to have been able to see any one. When the footman went up the staircase, the doorkeeper went out and shouted to the coachman, and the orderly stood up rigid with his arms at his sides, following with his eyes a little slight lady who was coming down the stairs with rapid steps, not in keeping with all the grandeur. Mariette had a large hat on, with feathers, a black dress and cape, and new black gloves. Her face was covered by a veil. When she saw Nekhludoff, she lifted the veil off a very pretty face with bright eyes that looked inquiringly at him. "Ah, Prince Dmitri Ivanovitch Nekhludoff," she said, with a soft, pleasant voice. "I should have known." "What? You even remember my name?" "I should think so. Why, I and my sisters have even been in love with you," she said in French. "But, dear me, how you have altered! Oh, what a pity I have to go out. But let us go up again," she said, and stopped hesitatingly. Then she looked at the clock. "No, I can't. I am going to Kamenskaya's to attend a mass for the dead. She is terribly afflicted." "Who is this Kamenskaya?" "Have you not heard? Her son was killed in a duel. He fought Posen. He was the only son." "Terrible. The mother is very much afflicted." "Yes, I have heard of it. No, I had better go, and you must come again, to-night or to-morrow," she said, and went to the door with quick, light steps. "I cannot come to-night," he said, going out after her, "but I have a request to make you," and he looked at the pair of bays that were drawing up to the front door. "What is this?" "This is a letter from aunt to you," said Nekhludoff, handing her a narrow envelope with a large crest. "You'll find all about it in there. I know Countess Katerina Ivanovna thinks I have some influence with my husband in business matters. She is mistaken. I can do nothing, and do not like to interfere. But, of course, for you I am willing to be false to my principle. What is this business about?" she said, searching in vain for her pocket with her little black gloved hand. "There is a girl imprisoned in the fortress, and she is ill and innocent." "What is her name?" "Lydia Shustova. It's in the note." "All right, I'll see what I can do," she said, and lightly jumped into her little, softly upholstered, open carriage, its brightly varnished splash guards glistening in the sunshine, and opened her parasol. The footman got on the box and gave the coachman a sign. The carriage moved, but at that moment she touched the coachman with her parasol, and the slim-legged beauties, the bay mares, stopped, bending their beautiful necks and stepping from foot to foot. "But you must come, only, please, without interested motives," and she looked at him with a smile, the force of which she well knew, and as if the performance over and she were drawing the curtain, she dropped the veil over her face again. "All right," and she again touched the coachman. Nekhludoff raised his hat, and the well-bred bays, slightly snorting, set off, their shoes clattering on the pavement, and the carriage rolled quickly and smoothly on its new rubber tyres, giving a jump only now and then over some unevenness of the road. End of Book 2, Chapter 15.
Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 16. An Up-to-Date Senator. When Nekhludoff remembered the smiles that had passed between him and Mariette, he shook his head. "You have hardly time to turn round before you are again drawn into this life," he thought, feeling that discord and those doubts which the necessity to curry favour from people he did not esteem caused. After considering where to go first, so as not to have to retrace his steps, Nekhludoff set off for the Senate. There he was shown into the office, where he found a great many very polite and very clean officials in the midst of a magnificent apartment. Maslova's petition was received and handed on to that wolf to whom Nekhludoff had a letter from his uncle, to be examined and reported on. "There will be a meeting of the Senate this week," the official said to Nekhludoff, "but Maslova's case will hardly come before that meeting." "It might come before the meeting on Wednesday, by special request," one of the officials remarked. During the time Nekhludoff waited in the office, while some information was being taken, he heard that the conversation in the Senate was all about the duel, and he heard a detailed account of how a young man, Kaminsky, had been killed. It was here he first heard all the facts of the case which was exciting the interest of all Petersburg. The story was this. Some officers were eating oysters and, as usual, drinking very much, when one of them said something ill-natured about the regiment to which Kaminsky belonged, and Kaminsky called him a liar. The other hit Kaminsky. The next day they fought. Kaminsky was wounded in the stomach and died 2 hours later. The murderer and the seconds were arrested, but it was said that though they were arrested and in the guardhouse, they would be set free in a fortnight. From the Senate Nekhlyudov drove to see an influential member of the Petition Committee, Baron Vorobyov, who lived in a splendid house belonging to the Crown. The doorkeeper told Nekhlyudov in a severe tone that the Baron could not be seen except on his reception days, that he was with His Majesty the Emperor today, and the next day he would again have to deliver a report. Nekhlyudov left his uncle's letter with the doorkeeper and went on to see the Senator Wolf. Wolf had just had his lunch and was, as usual, helping digestion by smoking a cigar and pacing up and down the room when Nekhlyudov came in. Vladimir Vassilievitch Wolf was certainly un homme très comme il faut, and prized this quality very highly. And from that elevation he looked down at everybody else. He could not but esteem this quality of his very highly, because it was thanks to it alone that he had made a brilliant career, the very career he desired, i.e., by marriage he obtained a fortune which brought him in 18,000 roubles a year, and by his own exertions the post of a senator. He considered himself not only un homme très comme il faut, but also a man of knightly honour. By honour he understood not accepting secret bribes from private persons, but he did not consider it dishonest to beg money for payment of fares and all sorts of travelling expenses from the Crown, and to do anything the government might require of him in return, to ruin hundreds of innocent people, to cause them to be imprisoned, to be exiled because of their love for their people and the religion of their fathers, as he had done in one of the governments of Poland when he was governor there. He did not consider it dishonourable, but even thought it a noble, manly, and patriotic action. Nor did he consider it dishonest to rob his wife and sister-in-law, as he had done, but thought it a wise way of arranging his family life. His family consisted of his commonplace wife, his sister-in-law, whose fortune he had appropriated by selling her estate and putting the money into his account, and his meek, frightened, plain daughter, who lived a lonely, weary life, from which she had lately begun to look for relaxation in evangelicism, attending meetings at Aline's, and the Countess Katerina Ivanovna, Wolf's son, who had grown a beard at the age of 15, and had at that age begun to drink and lead a depraved life, which he continued to do until the age of 20, when he was turned out by his father because he never finished his studies, moved in a low set, and made debts which committed the father. The father had once paid a debt of 250 roubles for his son, then another of 600 roubles, but warned the son that he did it for the last time, and that if the son did not reform he would be turned out of the house, and all further intercourse between him and his family would he put a stop to. The son did not reform, but made a debt of 1,000 roubles, and took the liberty of telling his father that life at home was a torment anyhow. Then Wolf declared to his son that he might go where he pleased, that he was no son of his any longer. Since then Wolf pretended he had no son, and no one at home dared speak to him about his son, and Vladimir Vassilievitch Wolf was firmly convinced that he had arranged his family life in the best way. Wolf stopped pacing up and down his study and greeted Nekhlyudov with a friendly, though slightly ironical smile. This was his way of showing how comme il faut he was, and how superior to the majority of men. He read the note which Nekhlyudov handed to him. Please take a seat, and excuse me if I continue to walk up and down, with your permission," he said, putting his hands into his coat pockets, and began again to walk with light, soft steps across his large, quietly and stylishly furnished study. "Very pleased to make your acquaintance, and of course very glad to do anything that Count Ivan Nikolaevitch wishes," he said, blowing the fragrant blue smoke out of his mouth and removing his cigar carefully so as not to drop the ash. "I should only like to ask that the case might come on soon, so that if the prisoner has to go to Siberia she might set off early," said Nekhludoff. "Yes, yes, with one of the first steamers from Nijni. I know," said Wolf, with his patronizing smile, always knowing in advance whatever one wanted to tell him. "What is the prisoner's name?" "Maslova." Wolf went up to the table and looked at a paper that lay on a piece of cardboard among other business papers. "Yes, yes, Maslova. All right, I will ask the others. We shall hear the case on Wednesday." "Then may I telegraph to the advocate?" "The advocate? What's that for?" "But if you like, why not?" "The causes for appeal may be insufficient," said Nekhludoff, "but I think the case will show that the sentence was passed owing to a misunderstanding." "Yes, yes, it may be so, but the Senate cannot decide the case on its merits," said Wolf, looking seriously at the ash of his cigar. "The Senate only considers the exactness of the application of the laws and their right interpretation." "But this seems to me to be an exceptional case." I know. All cases are exceptional. We shall do our duty, that's all." The ash was still holding on, but had begun breaking and was in danger of falling. "Do you often come to Petersburg?" said Wolf, holding his cigar so that the ash should not fall. But the ash began to shake, and Wolf carefully carried it to the ash pan, into which it fell. "What a terrible thing this is with regard to Kaminsky," he said. "A splendid young man, the only son, especially the mother's position," he went on, repeating almost word for word what everyone in Petersburg was at that time saying about Kaminsky. Wolf spoke a little about the Countess Katerina Ivanovna and her enthusiasm for the new religious teaching, which he neither approved nor disapproved of, but which was evidently needless to him who was so comme il faut, and then rang the bell. Nekhludoff bowed. "If it is convenient, come and dine on Wednesday, and I will give you a decisive answer," said Wolf, extending his hand. It was late, and Nekhludoff returned to his aunt's. Chapter 16. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 17. Countess Katerina Ivanovna's Dinner Party. Countess Katerina Ivanovna's dinner hour was 7:30, and the dinner was served in a new manner that Nekhludoff had not yet seen anywhere. After they had placed the dishes on the table, the waiters left the room and the diners helped themselves. The men would not let the ladies take the trouble of moving, and, as befitted the stronger sex, they manfully took upon themselves the burden of putting the food on the ladies' plates and of filling their glasses. When one course was finished, the Countess pressed the button of an electric bell fitted to the table, and the waiters stepped in noiselessly and quickly carried away the dishes, changed the plates, and brought in the next course. The dinner was very refined, the wines very costly. A French chef was working in the large, light kitchens with 2 white-clad assistants. There were 6 persons at dinner: the Count and Countess, their son, a surly officer in the Guards who sat with his elbows on the table, Nekhludoff, a French lady reader, and the Count's chief steward, who had come up from the country. Here, too, the conversation was about the duel, and opinions were given as to how the Emperor regarded the case. It was known that the Emperor was very much grieved for the mother's sake, and all were grieved for her, and as it was also known that the Emperor did not mean to be very severe to the murderer, who defended the honour of his uniform, all were also lenient to the officer who had defended the honour of his uniform. Only the Countess Katerina Ivanovna, with her free thoughtlessness, expressed her disapproval. "They get drunk and kill unobjectionable young men. I should not forgive them on any account," she said. "Now, that's a thing I cannot understand," said the Count. "I know that you can never understand what I say," the Countess began, and turning to Nekhludoff she added, "Everybody understands except my husband. I say I am sorry for the mother, and I do not wish him to be contented, having killed a man." Then her son, who had been silent up to then, took the murderer's part and rudely attacked his mother, arguing that an officer could not behave in any other way, because his fellow officers would condemn him and turn him out of the regiment. Nekhludoff listened to the conversation without joining in. Having been an officer himself, he understood, though he did not agree with young Tcharsky's arguments, and at the same time he could not help contrasting the fate of the officer with that of a beautiful young convict whom he had seen in the prison, and who was condemned to the mines for having killed another in a fight. Both had turned murderers through drunkenness. The peasant had killed a man in a moment of irritation, and he was parted from his wife and family, had chains on his legs and his head shaved, and was going to hard labour in Siberia, while the officer was sitting in a fine room in the guardhouse, eating a good dinner, drinking good wine, and reading books, and would be set free in a day or two to live as he had done before, having only become more interesting by the affair. Nekhludoff said what he had been thinking, and at first his aunt, Katerina Ivanovna, seemed to agree with him, but at last she became silent as the rest had done, and Nekhludoff felt that he had committed something akin to an impropriety. In the evening, soon after dinner, the large hall, with high-backed carved chairs arranged in rows as for a meeting, and an armchair next to a little table with a bottle of water for the speaker, began to fill with people come to hear the foreigner, Kiesewetter, preach. Elegant equipages stopped at the front entrance. In the hall sat richly dressed ladies in silks and velvets and lace, with false hair and false busts and drawn-in waists, and among them men in uniform and evening dress, and about 5 persons of the common class, i.e., 2 men servants, a shopkeeper, a footman, and a coachman. Kiesewetter, a thick-set, grizzly man, spoke English, and a thin young girl with pince-nez translated it into Russian promptly and well. He was saying that our sins were so great, the punishment for them so great and so unavoidable, that it was impossible to live anticipating such punishment. Beloved brothers and sisters, let us for a moment consider what we are doing, how we are living, how we have offended against the all-loving Lord, and how we make Christ suffer. And we cannot but understand that there is no forgiveness possible for us, no escape possible, that we are all doomed to perish. A terrible fate awaits us, everlasting torment, he said, with tears in his trembling voice. Oh, how can we be saved, brothers? How can we be saved from this terrible, unquenchable fire? The house is in flames. There is no escape. He was silent for a while, and real tears flowed down his cheeks. It was for about 8 years that each time, when he got to this part of his speech, which he himself liked so well, he felt a choking in his throat and an irritation in his nose, and the tears came in his eyes, and these tears touched him still more. Sobs were heard in the room. The Countess Katerina Ivanovna sat with her elbows on an inlaid table, leaning her head on her hands, and her shoulders were shaking. The coachman looked with fear and surprise at the foreigner, feeling as if he was about to run him down with the pole of his carriage, and the foreigner would not move out of his way. All sat in positions similar to that Katerina Ivanovna had assumed. Wolf's daughter, a thin, fashionably dressed girl, very like her father, knelt with her face in her hands. The orator suddenly uncovered his face and smiled, a very real-looking smile, such as actors express joy with, and began again with a sweet, gentle voice. "Yet there is a way to be saved. Here it is, a joyful, easy way. The salvation is the blood shed for us by the only Son of God, who gave himself up to torments for our sake. His sufferings, his blood will save us, brothers and sisters," he said again with tears in his voice. "Let us praise the Lord, who has given his only begotten Son for the redemption of mankind. His holy blood—" Nekhludoff felt so deeply disgusted that he rose silently, and frowning and keeping back a groan of shame, he left on tiptoe and went to his room. End of Book 2, Chapter 17. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 18. Officialdom. Hardly had Nekhludoff finished dressing the next morning. Just as he was about to go down, the footman brought him a card from the Moscow advocate. The advocate had come to St. Petersburg on business of his own, and was going to be present when Maslova's case was examined in the Senate, if that would be soon. The telegram sent by Nekhludoff crossed him on the way. Having found out from Nekhludoff when the case was going to be heard, and which senators were to be present, he smiled. "Exactly, all the three types of senators," he said. "Wolf is a Petersburg official, Skovorodnikov is a theoretical, and Bay a practical lawyer, and therefore the most alive of them all," said the advocate. "There is most hope of him. Well, and how about the petition committee?" "Oh, I'm going to Baron Vorobioff to-day. I could not get an audience with him yesterday." "Do you know why he is Baron Vorobioff?" said the advocate, noticing the slightly ironical stress that Nekhludoff put on this foreign title, followed by so very Russian a surname. "That was because the Emperor Paul rewarded the grandfather. I think he was one of the court footmen. By giving him this title, he managed to please him in some way, so he made him a baron. It's my wish, so don't gainsay me. And so there's a Baron Vorobioff, and very proud of the title. He is a dreadful old humbug." "Well, I'm going to see him," said Nekhludoff. "That's good. We can go together. I shall give you a lift." As they were going to start, a footman met Nekhludoff in the anteroom and handed him a note from Mariette. "Pour vous faire plaisir, voyages-tu avec contre mes principes, et j'ai intercédé auprès de mon mari pour votre protégé. Il s'est trouvé que cette personne peut être relaxée immédiatement. Mon mari a écrit au commandant. Venez donc descendre lit, je vous attends. M." "Just fancy," said Nekhludoff to the advocate. "Is this not dreadful? A woman whom they are keeping in solitary confinement for 7 months turns out to be quite innocent, and only a word was needed to get her released." "That's always so. Well, anyhow, you have succeeded in getting what you wanted." "Yes, but this success grieves me. Just think what must be going on there. Why have they been keeping her?" "Oh, it's best not to look too deeply into it." "Well, then, I shall give you a lift, if I may," said the advocate as they left the house, and a fine carriage that the advocate had hired drove up to the door. "It's Baron Vorobioff you are going to see?" The advocate gave the driver his directions, and the two good horses quickly brought Nekhludoff to the house in which the Baron lived. The Baron was at home. A young official in uniform, with a long, thin neck, a much protruding Adam's apple, and an extremely light walk, and two ladies were in the first room. "Your name, please?" the young man with the Adam's apple asked, stepping with extreme lightness and grace across from the ladies to Nekhludoff. Nekhludoff gave his name. "The Baron was just mentioning you," said the young man, the Baron's adjutant, and went out through an inner door. He returned, leading a weeping lady dressed in mourning. With her bony fingers the lady was trying to pull her tangled veil over her face in order to hide her tears. "Come in, please," said the young man to Nekhludoff, lightly stepping up to the door of the study and holding it open. When Nekhludoff came in he saw before him a thick-set man of medium height, with short hair, in a frock coat, who was sitting in an armchair opposite a large writing table and looking gaily in front of himself. The kindly, rosy red face, striking by its contrast with the white hair, moustaches and beard, turned towards Nekhludoff with a friendly smile. "Very glad to see you. Your mother and I were old acquaintances and friends. I have seen you as a boy, and later on as an officer. Sit down and tell me what I can do for you." "Yes, yes," he said, shaking his cropped white head while Nekhludoff was telling him Theodosia's story. Go on, I quite understand. It is certainly very touching. And have you handed in the petition?" "I have got the petition ready," Nekhludoff said, getting it out of his pocket. "But I thought of speaking to you first, in hopes that the case would then get special attention paid to it." "You have done very well. I shall certainly report it myself," said the Baron, unsuccessfully trying to put an expression of pity on his merry face. "Very touching. It is clear she was but a child. The husband treated her roughly. This repelled her, but as time went on they fell in love with each other. Yes, I will report the case." Count Ivan Mikhaelovitch was also going to speak about it. Nekhludoff had hardly got these words out when the Baron's face changed. "You had better hand in the petition into the office after all, and I shall do what I can," he said. At this moment the young official again entered the room, evidently showing off his elegant manner of walking. "That lady is asking if she may say a few words more." "Well, ask her in. Ah, mon cher, how many tears we have to see shed. If only we could dry them all. One does all that lies within one's power." The lady entered. "I forgot to ask you that he should not be allowed to give up the daughter because he is ready." "But I have already told you that I should do all I can. Baron, for the love of God, you will save the mother?" She seized his hand and began kissing it. "Everything shall be done." When the lady went out, Nekhludoff also began to take leave. "We shall do what we can. I shall speak about it at the Ministry of Justice, and when we get their answer, we shall do what we can." Nekhludoff left the study and went into the office again, just as in the Senate office he saw in a splendid apartment a number of very elegant officials, clean, polite, severely correct, and distinguished in dress and in speech. How many there are of them! How very many, and how well fed they all look! And what clean shirts and hands they all have! And how well all their boots are polished! Who does it for them? How comfortable they all are, as compared not only with the prisoners, but even with the peasants! These thoughts again involuntarily came to Nekhludoff's mind. End of Book 2, Chapter 18. By Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 19. An Old General of Repute. The man on whom depended the easing of the fate of the Petersburg prisoners was an old general of repute, a baron of German descent who, as it was said of him, had outlived his wits. He had received a profusion of orders, but only wore one of them, the Order of the White Cross. He had received this order, which he greatly valued, while serving in the Caucasus, because a number of Russian peasants, with their hair cropped and dressed in uniform and armed with guns and bayonets, had killed, at his command, more than 1,000 men who were defending their liberty, their homes, and their families. Later on he served in Poland, and there also made Russian peasants commit many different crimes, and got more orders and decorations for his uniform. Then he served somewhere else, and now that he was a weak old man he had this position, which ensured him a good house, an income, and respect. He strictly observed all the regulations which were prescribed from above, and was very zealous in the fulfilment of these regulations, to which he ascribed a special importance, considering that everything else in the world might be changed, except the regulations prescribed from above. His duty was to keep political prisoners, men and women, in solitary confinement in such a way that half of them perished in 10 years' time, some going out of their minds, some dying of consumption, some committing suicide by starving themselves to death, cutting their veins with bits of glass, hanging or burning themselves to death. The old General was not ignorant of this. It all happened within his knowledge. But these cases no more touched his conscience than accidents brought on by thunderstorms, floods, etc. These cases occurred as a consequence of the fulfilment of regulations prescribed from above by His Imperial Majesty. These regulations had to be carried out without fail, and therefore it was absolutely useless to think of the consequences of their fulfilment. The old General did not even allow himself to think of such things, counting it his patriotic duty as a soldier not to think of them, for fear of getting weak in the carrying out of these, according to his opinion, very important obligations. Once a week the old General made the round of the cells, one of the duties of his position, and asked the prisoners if they had any requests to make. The prisoners had all sorts of requests. He listened to them quietly, in impenetrable silence, and never fulfilled any of their requests, because they were all in disaccord with the regulations. Just as Nekhludoff drove up to the old General's house, the high notes of the bells on the belfry clock chimed "Great is the Lord," and then struck 2. The sound of these chimes brought back to Nekhludoff's mind what he had read in the notes of the Decembrists. The Decembrists were a group who attempted, but failed, to put an end to absolutism in Russia at the time of the accession of Nicholas I. About the way this sweet music, repeated every hour, re-echoes in the hearts of those imprisoned for life. Meanwhile the old General was sitting in his darkened drawing-room at an inlaid table, turning a saucer on a piece of paper with the aid of a young artist, the brother of one of his subordinates. The thin, weak, moist fingers of the artist were pressed against the wrinkled and stiff-jointed fingers of the old General, and the hands, joined in this manner, were moving together with the saucer over a paper that had all the letters of the alphabet written on it. The saucer was answering the questions put by the General as to how souls will recognize each other after death. When Nekhludoff sent in his card by an orderly acting as footman, the soul of Joan of Arc was speaking by the aid of the saucer. The soul of Joan of Arc had already spelt, letter by letter, the words, "They well knew each other," and these words had been written down. When the orderly came in, the saucer had stopped first on B, then on Y, and began jerking hither and thither. This jerking was caused by the General's opinion that the next letter should be B, i.e., Joan of Arc ought to say that the souls will know each other by being cleansed of all that is earthly, or something of the kind, clashing with the opinion of the artist, who thought the next letter should be L, i.e., that the souls should know each other by light emanating from their astral bodies. The General, with his bushy grey eyebrows gravely contracted, sat gazing at the hands on the saucer, and, imagining that it was moving of its own accord, kept pulling the saucer towards B. The pale-faced young artist, with his thin hair combed back behind his ears, was looking with his lifeless blue eyes into a dark corner of the drawing-room, nervously moving his lips and pulling the saucer towards L. The General made a wry face at the interruption, but after a moment's pause he took the card, put on his pince-nez, and uttering a groan, rose, in spite of the pain in his back, to his full height, rubbing his numb fingers. "Ask him into the study." "With your Excellency's permission I will finish it alone," said the artist, rising. "I feel the presence." "All right, finish alone," the General said, severely and decidedly, and stepped quickly, with big, firm, and measured strides, into his study. "Very pleased to see you," said the General to Nekhludoff, uttering the friendly words in a gruff tone, and pointing to an armchair by the side of the writing table. "Have you been in Petersburg long?" Nekhludoff replied that he had only lately arrived. "Is the Princess, your mother, well?" "My mother is dead." "Forgive me, I am very sorry. My son told me he had met you." The General's son was making the same kind of career for himself that the father had done, and, having passed the military academy, was now serving in the inquiry office, and was very proud of his duties there. His occupation was the management of government spies. "Why, I served with your father. We were friends, comrades. And you, are you also in the service?" "No, I am not." The General bent his head disapprovingly. "I have a request to make, General." "Very pleased. In what way can I be of service to you?" "If my request is out of place, pray pardon me, but I am obliged to make it." "What is it?" "There is a certain Gourkevitch imprisoned in the fortress. His mother asks for an interview with him, or at least to be allowed to send him some books." The General expressed neither satisfaction nor dissatisfaction at Nekhludoff's request, but bending his head on one side, he closed his eyes as if considering. In reality he was not considering anything, and was not even interested in Nekhludoff's questions, well knowing that he would answer them according to the law. He was simply resting mentally, and not thinking at all. "You see," he said at last, "this does not depend on me. There is a regulation, confirmed by His Majesty, confirming interviews. And as to books, we have a library, and they may have what is permitted." "Yes, but he wants scientific books. He wishes to study." "Don't you believe it," growled the General. "It's not study he wants. It is just only restlessness." "But what is to be done? They must occupy their time somehow in their hard condition," said Nekhludoff. "They are always complaining," said the General. "We know them." He spoke of them in a general way, as if they were all a specially bad race of men. "They have conveniences here which can be found in few places of confinement," said the General, and he began to enumerate the comforts the prisoners enjoyed, as if the aim of the institution was to give the people imprisoned there a comfortable home. "It is true it used to be rather rough, but now they are very well kept here," he continued. "They have 3 courses for dinner, and one of them meat, cutlets or rissoles, and on Sundays they get a 4th, a sweet dish. God grant every Russian may eat as well as they do." Like all old people, the General, having once got on to a familiar topic, enumerated the various proofs he had often given before of the prisoners being exacting and ungrateful. "They get books on spiritual subjects and old journals. We have a library, only they rarely read. At first they seem interested. Later on the new books remain uncut, and the old ones with their leaves unturned. We tried them," said the old General, with a dim likeness of a smile. "We put bits of paper in on purpose, which remained just as they had been placed. Writing is also not forbidden," he continued. "A slate is provided, and a slate pencil, so that they can write as a pastime. They can wipe the slate and write again, but they don't write either. Oh, they very soon get quite tranquil. At first they seem restless, but later on they even grow fat and become very quiet." Thus spoke the General, never suspecting the terrible meaning of his words. Nekhludoff listened to the hoarse old voice, looked at the stiff limbs, the swollen eyelids under the grey brows, at the old, clean-shaved, flabby jaw, supported by the collar of the military uniform, at the white cross that this man was so proud of, chiefly because he had gained it by exceptionally cruel and extensive slaughter, and knew that it was useless to reply to the old man or to explain the meaning of his own words to him. He made another effort, and asked about the prisoner Shoustova, for whose release, as he had been informed that morning, orders were given. Shoustova? I cannot remember all their names. There are so many of them, he said, as if reproaching them because there were so many. He rang and ordered the secretary to be called. While waiting for the latter, he began persuading Nekhludoff to serve, saying that honest noblemen, counting himself among the number, were particularly needed by the Tsar and the country, he added, evidently only to round off his sentence. I am old, yet I am serving still, as well as my strength allows. The secretary, a dry, emaciated man, with restless, intelligent eyes, came in and reported that Shoustova was imprisoned in some queer fortified place, and that he had received no orders concerning her. When we get the order we shall let her out the same day. We do not keep them. We do not value their visits much, said the General, with another attempt at a playful smile, which only distorted his old face. Nekhludoff rose, trying to keep from expressing the mixed feelings of repugnance and pity which he felt towards this terrible old man. The old man, on his part, considered that he should not be too severe on the thoughtless and evidently misguided son of his old comrade, and should not leave him without advice. "Good-bye, my dear fellow. Do not take it amiss. It is my affection that makes me say it. Do not keep company with such people as we have at our place here. There are no innocent ones among them. All these people are most immoral. We know them," he said, in a tone that admitted no possibility of doubt. And he did not doubt, not because the thing was so, but because, if it was not so, he would have to admit himself to be not a noble hero living out the last days of a good life, but a scoundrel who sold, and still continued in his old age to sell, his conscience. "Best of all, go and serve," he continued. "The Tsar needs honest men, and the country," he added. "Well, supposing I and the others refuse to serve as you are doing, who would be left? Here we are finding fault with the order of things, and yet not wishing to help the government." With a deep sigh Nekhludoff made a low bow, shook the large, bony hand condescendingly stretched out to him, and left the room. The General shook his head reprovingly, and, rubbing his back, he again went into the drawing-room where the artist was waiting for him. He had already written down the answer given by the soul of Joan of Arc. The General put on his pince-nez and read, "Will know one another by light emanating from their astral bodies." "Ah," said the General, with approval, and closed his eyes. "But how is one to know if the light of all is alike?" he asked, and again crossed fingers with the artist on the saucer. The isvostchik drove Nekhludoff out of the gate. "It is dull here, sir," he said, turning to Nekhludoff. "I almost wished to drive off without waiting for you." Nekhludoff agreed. "Yes, it is dull," and he took a deep breath and looked up with a sense of relief at the grey clouds that were floating in the sky, and at the glistening ripples made by the boats and steamers on the Neva. End of Book 2, Chapter 19. By Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 20. Maslova's Appeal. The next day Maslova's case was to be examined at the Senate, and Nekhludoff and the advocate met at the majestic portal of the building, where several carriages were waiting. Ascending the magnificent and imposing staircase to the first floor, the advocate, who knew all the ins and outs of the place, turned to the left, and entered through a door which had the date of the introduction of the Code of Laws above it. After taking off his overcoat in the first narrow room, he found out from the attendant that the senators had all arrived, and that the last had just come in. Fanarin, in his swallow-tail coat, a white tie above the white shirt front, and a self-confident smile on his lips, passed into the next room. In this room there were to the right a large cupboard and a table, and to the left a winding staircase, which an elegant official in uniform was descending with a portfolio under his arm. In this room an old man, with long white hair and a patriarchal appearance, attracted everyone's attention. He wore a short coat and grey trousers. Two attendants stood respectfully beside him. The old man with white hair entered the cupboard and shut himself in. Fanarin noticed a fellow advocate dressed in the same way as himself, with a white tie and dress coat, and at once entered into an animated conversation with him. Nekhlyudov was meanwhile examining the people in the room. The public consisted of about 15 persons, of whom 2 were ladies, a young one with a pince-nez, and an old grey-haired one. A case of libel was to be heard that day, and therefore the public were more numerous than usual, chiefly persons belonging to the journalistic world. The usher, a red-cheeked, handsome man in a fine uniform, came up to Fanarin and asked him what his business was. When he heard that it was the case of Maslova, he noted something down and walked away. Then the cupboard door opened, and the old man with the patriarchal appearance stepped out, no longer in a short coat, but in a gold-trimmed attire which made him look like a bird, and with metal plates on his breast. This funny costume seemed to make the old man himself feel uncomfortable, and, walking faster than his wont, he hurried out of the door opposite the entrance. "That is Bay, a most estimable man," Fanarin said to Nekhlyudov, and then, having introduced him to his colleague, he explained the case that was about to be heard, which he considered very interesting. The hearing of the case soon commenced, and Nekhlyudov, with the public, entered the left side of the Senate chamber. They all, including Fanarin, took their places behind a grating. Only the Petersburg advocate went up to a desk in front of the grating. The Senate chamber was not so big as the criminal court, and was more simply furnished. Only the table in front of the senators was covered with crimson, gold-trimmed velvet instead of green cloth, but the attributes of all places of judgment, i.e. the mirror of justice, the icon, the emblem of hypocrisy, and the emperor's portrait, the emblem of servility, were there. The usher announced in the same solemn manner, "The court is coming." Everyone rose in the same way, and the senators entered in their uniforms and sat down on high-backed chairs and leant on the table, trying to appear natural, just in the same way as the judges in the court of law. There were 4 senators present: Nikitin, who took the chair, a clean-shaved man with a narrow face and steely eyes; Wolf, with significantly compressed lips and little white hands, with which he kept turning over the pages of the business papers; Skovorodnikov, a heavy, fat, pock-marked man, the learned lawyer; and Bay, the patriarchal-looking man who had arrived last. With the advocates entered the chief secretary and public prosecutor, a lean, clean-shaven young man of medium height, a very dark complexion, and sad black eyes. Nekhlyudov knew him at once, in spite of his curious uniform and the fact that he had not seen him for 6 years. He had been one of his best friends in Nekhlyudov's student days. "The public prosecutor, Selenin?" Nekhlyudov asked, turning to the advocate. "Yes. Why?" "I know him well. He is a fine fellow." "And a good public prosecutor, business-like. Now he is the man you should have interested." "He will act according to his conscience in any case," said Nekhludoff, recalling the intimate relations and friendship between himself and Selenin, and the attractive qualities of the latter. Purity, honesty, and good breeding in its best sense. "Yes, there is no time now," whispered Fanarin, who was listening to the report of the case that had commenced. The Court of Justice was accused of having left a decision of the Court of Law unaltered. Nekhludoff listened and tried to make out the meaning of what was going on, but, just as in the criminal court, his chief difficulty was that not the evidently chief point, but some side issues, were being discussed. The case was that of a newspaper which had published the account of a swindle arranged by a director of a limited liability company. It seemed that the only important question was whether the director of the company really abused his trust, and how to stop him from doing it. But the questions under consideration were whether the editor had a right to publish this article of his contributor, and what he had been guilty of in publishing it, slander or libel, and in what way slander included libel, or libel included slander, and something rather incomprehensible to ordinary people about all sorts of statutes and resolutions passed by some general department. The only thing clear to Nekhludoff was that, in spite of what Wolf had so strenuously insisted on the day before, i.e., that the Senate could not try a case on its merits, in this case he was evidently strongly in favour of repealing the decision of the Court of Justice, and that Selenin, in spite of his characteristic reticence, stated the opposite opinion with quite unexpected warmth. The warmth, which surprised Nekhludoff, evinced by the usually self-controlled Selenin, was due to his knowledge of the director's shabbiness in money matters, and the fact, which had accidentally come to his ears, that Wolf had been to a swell dinner party at the swindler's house only a few days before. Now that Wolf spoke on the case, guardedly enough, but with evident bias, Selenin became excited and expressed his opinion with too much nervous irritation for an ordinary business transaction. It was clear that Selenin's speech had offended Wolf. He grew red, moved in his chair, made silent gestures of surprise, and at last rose with a very dignified and injured look, together with the other senators, and went out into the debating room. "What particular case have you come about?" the usher asked again, addressing Fanarin. "I have already told you, Maslova's case." "Yes, quite so. It is to be heard to-day, but—" "But what?" the advocate asked. "Well, you see, this case was to be examined without taking sides, so that the senators will hardly come out again after passing the resolution. But I will inform them." "What do you mean?" "I'll inform them, I'll inform them," and the usher again put something down on his paper. The senators really meant to pronounce their decision concerning the libel case, and then to finish the other business, Maslova's case among it, over their tea and cigarettes, without leaving the debating room. End of Book 2, Chapter 20. Leo Tolstoy, translated by Louise Maud. Book 2, Chapter 21. The Appeal Dismissed. As soon as the senators were seated round the table in the debating room, Wolf began to bring forward with great animation all the motives in favour of a repeal. The chairman, an ill-natured man at best, was in a particularly bad humour that day. His thoughts were concentrated on the words he had written down in his memoranda on the occasion when not he but Viglanov was appointed to the important post he had long coveted. It was the chairman, Nikitin's honest conviction that his opinions of the officials of the two upper classes with which he was in connection would furnish valuable material for the historians. He had written a chapter the day before in which the officials of the upper classes got it hot for preventing him, as he expressed it, from averting the ruin towards which the present rulers of Russia were driving it, which simply meant that they had prevented his getting a better salary. and now he was considering what a new light to posterity this chapter would shed on events. "Yes, certainly," he said, in reply to the words addressed to him by Woolf, without listening to them. Bay was listening to Woolf with a sad face, and drawing a garland on the paper that lay before him. Bay was a Liberal of the very first water. He held sacred the liberal traditions of the 6th decade of this century, and if he ever overstepped the limits of strict neutrality, it was always in the direction of liberalism. So in this case, beside the fact that the swindling director, who was prosecuting for libel, was a bad lot, the prosecution of a journalist for libel in itself tending, as it did, to restrict the freedom of the press, inclined Bay to reject the appeal. When Woolf concluded his arguments, Bay stopped drawing his garland and began in a sad and gentle voice. He was sad because he was obliged to demonstrate such truisms, concisely, simply, and convincingly, to show how unfounded the accusation was, and then, bending his white head, he continued drawing his garland. Skovorodnikoff, who sat opposite Woolf, and, with his fat fingers, kept shoving his beard and moustaches into his mouth, stopped chewing his beard as soon as Bay was silent, and said with a loud, grating voice that, notwithstanding the fact of the director being a terrible scoundrel, he would have been for the repeal of the sentence if there were any legal reasons for it. But as there were none, he was of Bay's opinion. He was glad to put this spoke in Woolf's wheel. The chairman agreed with Skovorodnikoff, and the appeal was rejected. Woolf was dissatisfied, especially because it was like being caught acting with dishonest partiality. So he pretended to be indifferent, and, unfolding the document which contained Maslova's case, he became engrossed in it. Meanwhile the senators rang and ordered tea, and began talking about the event that, together with the duel, was occupying the Petersburgers. It was the case of the chief of a government department who was accused of the crime provided for in Statute 995. "What nastiness!" said Bay with disgust. "Why? Where is the harm of it? I can show you a Russian book containing the project of a German writer who openly proposes that it should not be considered a crime," said Skovorodnikoff, drawing in greedily the fumes of the crumpled cigarette which he held between his fingers close to the palm, and he laughed boisterously. "Impossible," said Bay. "I shall show it to you," said Skovorodnikoff, giving the full title of the book, and even its date and the name of its editor. "I hear he has been appointed governor to some town in Siberia." "That's fine. The archdeacon will meet him with a crucifix. They ought to appoint an archdeacon of the same sort," said Skovorodnikoff. "I could recommend them one," and he threw the end of his cigarette into his saucer, and again shoved as much of his beard and moustaches as he could into his mouth, and began chewing them. The usher came in and reported the advocate's and Nekhlyudov's desire to be present at the examination of Maslova's case. "This case," Woolf said, "is quite romantic," and he told them what he knew about Nekhlyudov's relations with Maslova. When they had spoken a little about it and finished their tea and cigarettes, the senators returned into the Senate chamber and proclaimed their decision in the libel case, and began to hear Maslova's case. Woolf, in his thin voice, reported Maslova's appeal very fully, but again not without some bias and an evident wish for the repeal of the sentence. "Have you anything to add?" the chairman said, turning to Fanarin. Fanarin rose, and, standing with his broad white chest expanded, proved point by point, with wonderful exactness and persuasiveness, how the court had in 6 points strayed from the exact meaning of the law. And besides this he touched, though briefly, on the merits of the case and on the crying injustice of the sentence. The tone of his speech was one of apology to the senators, who, with their penetration and judicial wisdom, could not help seeing and understanding it all better than he could. He was obliged to speak only because the duty he had undertaken forced him to do so. After Fanarin's speech, One might have thought that there could not remain the least doubt that the Senate ought to repeal the decision of the court. When he had finished his speech, Fanarin looked round with a smile of triumph, seeing which Nekhlyudov felt certain that the case was won. But when he looked at the senators, he saw that Fanarin smiled and triumphed all alone. The senators and the public prosecutor did not smile nor triumph, but looked like people wearied, and who were thinking, "We have often heard the like of you. It is all in vain," and were only too glad when he stopped and ceased uselessly detaining them there. Immediately after the end of the advocate's speech the chairman turned to the public prosecutor. Selenin briefly and clearly expressed himself in favour of leaving the decision of the court unaltered, as he considered all the reasons for appealing inadequate. After this the senators went out into the debating room. They were divided in their opinions. Wolf was in favour of altering the decision. Bay, when he had understood the case, took up the same side with fervour, vividly presenting the scene at the court to his companions as he clearly saw it himself. Nikitin, who was always on the side of severity and formality, took up the other side. All depended on Skovorodnikov's vote, and he voted for rejecting the appeal, because Nekhlyudov's determination to marry the woman on moral grounds was extremely repugnant to him. Skovorodnikov was a materialist, a Darwinian, and counted every manifestation of abstract morality, or worse still religion, not only as a despicable folly, but as a personal affront to himself. All this bother about a prostitute and the presence of a celebrated advocate and Nekhlyudov in the Senate were in the highest degree repugnant to him. So he shoved his beard into his mouth and made faces, and very skilfully pretended to know nothing of this case, excepting that the reasons for an appeal were insufficient, and that he therefore agreed with the chairman to leave the decision of the court unaltered. So the sentence remained unrepealed. End of Book 2, Chapter 21.